Hello, everyone, and welcome to the place where shadows whisper and nightmares softly breathe. So close your eyes, take a slow breath. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where you from and what time are you watching? Let's get comfortable and relax.
It was a chilly October evening when I decided to drive out to the old cabin my grandfather had left me, hidden deep in the woods of Maine. I hadn't been there since I was a child, and the place was surrounded by folklore that made my skin crawl. Locals whispered tales of strange occurrences and eerie sightings, but I dismissed them as nothing more than small-town myths. I arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a dark veil over the dense trees. The cabin stood there, worn and weathered, its wooden exterior groaning softly with age. Despite its dilapidated state, it felt like a sanctuary of sorts, a remnant of my childhood. I half expected the ghost of my grandfather to greet me at the door. Inside, the air was stale, and a musky scent lingered in every corner, as if the place had been holding its breath for years. I set about lighting a fire in the old stone fireplace, the crackle of the flames providing a sense of comfort against the encroaching darkness. As I settled in with a cup of coffee, I began to glance around the space, admiring the rustic charm, but it wasn't long before I noticed something unsettling. The walls seemed to have an aura, the shadows flickering in ways that felt almost too intentional. It was as if the cabin was watching me. Dismissing the feeling as remnants of childhood fears, I focused on the cozy ambience of the fire. Night crept in, bringing with it an oppressive silence that was only broken by the occasional crack of a branch outside. I wrapped myself in a blanket, lost in thought, when a soft thud echoed from the attic above. My heart raced. The place had been empty for years. There shouldn't be anyone up there besides me. I rationalized that it could be an animal, perhaps a raccoon seeking shelter, but the unease wouldn't leave me. Curiosity and a sense of dread compelled me to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight, my pulse quickening with every creak of the stairs underfoot. As I reached the attic door, I hesitated, listening intently for any sound. Just silence. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The beam of my flashlight illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, revealing stacks of old boxes and forgotten furniture. But it was then I spotted something out of place, a large, black trunk nestled in the far corner, almost as if it were waiting for me. I approached, the hair on the back of my neck prickling. Something about it felt wrong. I hesitated, but the urge to discover its contents was overwhelming. I pulled at the heavy lid, and it creaked open with a reluctant groan. Inside was a collection of old photographs and letters, some dating back decades, revealing secrets I never knew about my family. But there was something else, a thick, leather-bound journal that seemed to pulse with energy. I opened it, the yellowed pages crackling like dry leaves. The writings were haunting, detailing strange rituals and encounters with dark entities. My skin crawled as I realized they were written in my grandfather's handwriting. The entries grew darker, describing unsettling occurrences and a growing sense of dread. The last entry was chilling. The darkness is here. It knows me. I can hear it whispering through the walls. As I read those words, I felt a cold breath against my neck, and I spun around, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing. Panic set in. I slammed the journal shut, wishing I could erase the images from my mind. I stumbled back, bumping into the trunk, and suddenly the lights flickered, plunging the attic into semi-darkness. An overwhelming feeling of despair washed over me, and I rushed down the stairs, the wooden steps groaning louder than before. Back in the living room, I tried to regain my composure, but the room felt suffocating. The flickering fire cast ominous shadows that danced around the walls, morphing into grotesque shapes. I felt as though I were being watched, an invisible presence looming over me. My phone buzzed, breaking the paralyzing silence. I glanced at it, a text from my mother, asking if I was having a good time. I hesitated before replying, wanting to tell her everything, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I typed a quick yes and put my phone down. As the night dragged on, the silence became oppressive. I fought the urge to leave, but a primal fear had me on edge. I was convinced that whatever had haunted my grandfather was now lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. Just then, I heard it, a soft whisper that seemed to echo from the very walls of the cabin. I froze, terror coursing through me as I strained to listen, hoping I was imagining things. But the whispering grew louder, more distinct. It was my name, repeatedly spoken in a low, gravelly tone. Panic surged within me. I grabbed my coat and raced for the door, eagerness to escape this nightmare driving my every move. I flung the cabin door open, the night air hitting me like a cold slap. As I sprinted toward my car, I could have sworn I heard the heavy thud of footsteps behind me. I didn't look back. I leapt into the driver's seat, fumbled with the keys, and started the engine with a roar. As I sped down the winding dirt road, the only thing I could think of was the journal, the whispers, and the realization that the darkness from my grandfather's past was now mine to bear. I never returned to that cabin, and I often wonder if it still waits in silence, biding its time for the next unwitting soul to uncover its secrets. The woods remain quiet, but I can still hear the echo of whispers in the wind, tales of warnings I wish I had never ignored. The summer of my 13th year began like any other, with the lazy hum of cicadas echoing through the air, a welcome blanket of warmth that invited long days filled with adventure. I grew up in a quiet town bordered by dense woods, where the whispers of the trees seemed to hold secrets of their own. The locals often spoke of an old legend that deep within those woods lay a forgotten cabin, once home to a recluse whose fate had become a subject of morbid curiosity. They said he had vanished under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind a darkness that clung to the very air of the forest. Naturally, these tales ignited a reckless curiosity in my friends and me, daring us to explore what we believed to be nothing more than a story meant to scare children. One lazy afternoon, with the summer sun slicing through the canopy above, we set off, filled with bravado and a misguided sense of invincibility. The woods welcomed us with open arms, the trail winding ahead like an ancient serpent. We jostled and joked, but with each step deeper into the thicket, the atmosphere shifted, the laughter slowly dissipated, replaced by an almost oppressive silence, the kind that causes the hairs on your neck to prickle with awareness. As we pressed on, the sunlight dimmed, and shadows began to twist and contort around us, asserting a presence that felt decidedly sinister. We stumbled upon it, the cabin. It stood forlorn and dilapidated, vines creeping over its weathered wood, a mere whisper of what it once had been. My heart raced, a mix of fear and thrill coursing through my veins. We dared each other to enter, and after what felt like an eternity of hesitation, we pushed open the creaking door. The interior was a tomb of dust and darkness, the air thick with the scent of mildew and decay. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, illuminating the remnants of a life long abandoned, a rickety table, a broken chair, and scattered belongings that spoke volumes of their last owner. As we explored, an unsettling sensation tugged at my mind, a whisper of dread echoing in the chambers of my heart. My friends, now silent and apprehensive, clustered close, their eyes darting nervously to the corners of the room, as if they sensed something we couldn't see. Then, I noticed it, a journal, half buried beneath a warped floorboard, its pages yellowed with age. I reached for it, curiosity overwhelming my caution. As I flipped through the brittle pages, I felt an icy grip of unease tighten around my chest. The writings were jagged, frantic, filled with the ramblings of a mind unraveling, a descent into paranoia and despair. The final passages sent chills down my spine. They spoke of figures lurking in the shadows, of whispers echoing through the trees at night, of a darkness that had claimed the old man, body and soul. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted, a suffocating tension wrapping itself around us like a noose. One of my friends gasped, pointing towards the doorway. I turned, and my stomach dropped. A figure stood just beyond the threshold, partially obscured by the fading light, features indistinguishable but malevolent in presence. It felt as though time froze, the world narrowing down to that singular, terrifying moment. A scream lodged in my throat, a primal urge to escape overwhelming my senses. Without a word, we turned and bolted, the cabin's haunting aura chasing us through the woods. Twisted branches reached out like skeletal hands, clawing at us as we fled, the suffocating whispers of the forest closing in with every desperate footfall. We didn't look back until we burst into the safety of the clearing, panting and wild-eyed. A heavy silence fell around us, the cicadas resuming their monotonous song as if mocking our fear. The cabin lay behind us, a dark specter in the fading light, and though we swore never to return, I could feel its presence lingering in the back of my mind, an itch I could not scratch. For weeks afterward, I was haunted by vivid nightmares, the figure from the doorway gliding through the shadows of my dreams, always just out of reach. My friends tried to reassure me, but the feeling that we had awakened something in that old cabin gnawed at my conscience. A few months later, I learned from a local that the old man hadn't just vanished. He had been found, they said, but it hadn't been a peaceful end. A chill swept through me as I pieced together the rumor. He had told tales of voices in the woods, of things that should not be. I never returned to those woods, never spoke of that day. The legend transformed, mutating in my mind, becoming a dark warning, a haunting reminder that some stories are best left buried, their truths lingering just out of sight, waiting for those foolish enough to seek them out. As I sit here in the dim glow of my computer screen, I can't shake the feeling that the shadows might swallow me whole if I let my guard down. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when my nights were untroubled, filled with laughter and the soft chatter of friends around a campfire. That all changed during a cool autumn evening when we decided to explore an abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. It had been the talk of the school for months, whispered stories of tortured souls and flickering lights that people claimed to see through the cracked windows. We were young and reckless, fueled by a mix of curiosity and a thrill for danger, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, we made our way to the foreboding structure that loomed in front of us like a toothy grin. The heavy wooden door creaked open with just a gentle push, sending a shiver down my spine. The scent of mildew and decay assaulted our senses, and with each step deeper into the heart of the asylum, I could feel the oppressive weight of its history pressing down on my chest. My friends were laughing at the echoes of our footsteps, huddled together in a tight circle, but I couldn't help but feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The walls were adorned with peeling paint, and the faded, peeling wallpaper seemed to whisper stories of despair. It felt like we were not alone, but the others brushed my fears aside as mere overactive imagination. We wandered through long abandoned rooms, each more chilling than the last, the remnants of a life once lived adorned with broken furniture, rusted medical equipment, and unsettling drawings left behind by previous inhabitants. I remember hesitating in a particular room, an old chapel of sorts, the faded altar offering a peculiar sense of reverence despite the dust and darkness. My friends continued exploring, but I felt anchored, as if the air itself had thickened around me. A flicker of movement caught my eye, nothing more than a shadow dancing along the wall, but it sent a pulse of fear through me. I shook my head, trying to clear the sensation, but it clung to me like a cold sweat. I turned to holler for my friends, but the words caught in my throat. A low, guttural sound echoed down the hall, and it was unlike anything I had ever heard. It urged me to flee, to pack my things and run toward the exit, but my curiosity held me anchored, an invisible tether keeping me tethered to the haunting mysteries of this place. We gathered together again, feeling emboldened by our shared levity, our giggles reverberating against the tattered walls. That's when Linda, the bravest of us all, suggested we split up. The words sent a jolt of horror coursing through me, but the thrill-seeking spirit of youth won over my reservations. The plan was simple: 5 minutes apart before meeting back at the chapel, and if anyone felt uncomfortable, we'd call it off. One by one, we ventured down different hallways, the dim light of our flashlights cautiously illuminating the twisted paths before us. I wandered into a room filled with what appeared to be remnants of an old therapy session, empty chairs arranged in a maddening circle. I felt a cold draft rush past me, ruffling the pages of an open book that lay on the floor. It was a journal, filled with frantic scrawlings that sent chills dancing down my spine. The last entry spoke of a presence that would follow the writer home, a dark entity that had fed on fear and despair. My heart raced, and just as I raised my flashlight to read more, a loud crash echoed from the hall. I screamed, my voice shattered against the cold silence, and in a heartbeat, I was running back to the chapel, my mind racing with possibilities of what could have caused that sound. When I reached the chapel, fear clenched my gut as I found it empty. The others were nowhere to be seen. The silence was unnatural. A thick fog of dread closed in around me. I called out for them, my voice trembling, but only the shadows answered. It felt like an eternity passed as I stood there, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Just as panic threatened to take over, I heard faint whispers echoing from the hallway, voices that curled my stomach into knots, like fingers wrapping around my throat. My instincts screamed for me to flee, to run as far as I could from that place, but the whispers grew louder, more urgent, calling out to me in a voice that was both soothing and terrifying. I turned and bolted down the darkness of the hallway, my breath quickening as I dashed past the forgotten relics of the tortured past. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was chasing me, that icy fingers were brushing against my skin, urging me to turn around. I burst through the heavy doors of the asylum, the night air hitting my face like a slap. In the distance, I could see the dim lights of my friends' flashlights flickering like stars against the black canvas of the sky. But they weren't all there, which sent a fresh wave of terror crashing over me. We scrambled to find one another, desperate and fearful, each claiming to have heard those dreadful whispers, felt the same presence hovering just beyond sight. In the end, we left with one member missing, a chilling reminder that not every adventure ends safely. Even now, years later, the The story echoes in the recesses of my mind, shadows in the corners that remind me of that night. I often find myself glancing over my shoulder as I walk down empty halls, afraid of what might still linger, waiting to reclaim what it has lost. I never dare to return to that asylum. Some doors are best left unopened, and some shadows are best left unprovoked. Still, sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I can hear the whispers calling, just beneath the surface of the wind. It was a cold autumn evening, the sky overcast and the air thick with an uneasy silence that blanketed the small town of Black Hollow. I had recently moved there to escape the chaos of city life, seeking solace in the simplicity of rural living. The townsfolk were kind but distant, their eyes often flickering with an unspoken caution whenever they glanced in my direction. Rumors, I soon learned, seemed to cling to the air of Black Hollow like a dense fog, and one particular legend haunted the whispers among the locals, the tale of the wraith of Willow Creek, an entity said to emerge when the leaves turned golden brown and fell to the ground, its apparition heralding misfortune and despair. I brushed the stories off as mere folklore, the kind meant to frighten children on stormy nights. It was just my mind playing tricks on me in the dim light of my new, creaky old home. The first week was uneventful, waking, brewing coffee, and exploring the quaint shops that lined the town square. I felt a strange pull towards the nearby Willow Creek, a river that wound through the heart of the woods behind my house. On a whim, I decided to follow its banks one evening. The trees loomed tall and foreboding, their branches swaying in a wind that felt almost sentient. The deeper I wandered, the more aware I became of an unsettling presence, as if I were being watched. Dismissing the thought, I pressed on, reaching a clearing where the water glistened under the dying light. It was beautiful, yet a shiver ran down my spine, a gentle reminder of the stories I'd heard. As night began to drape its shadow across the land. I turned to leave, but something stopped me, a sound just beyond the trees. A soft whisper that seemed to call my name. Fear prickled at the back of my mind, but curiosity tugged at my feet. I edged closer, straining to hear the voice that was barely audible. "Help me. Help us." The words melted into the night, echoing eerily. I took a cautious step forward, then another, breaking through the underbrush. The hairs on my arms stood on end. The voice grew louder, more desperate, and suddenly it stopped. I spun around, my heart racing, the forest now unnaturally still, as if every creature had paused to watch me, to wait. A chill crept through the air, thick and tangible. I turned back toward the creek, where the water was eerily calm, reflecting the moonlight like glass. But what I saw next rooted me in place, a figure standing on the opposite bank, shrouded in shadows, its eyes glowing faintly like embers in the dark. A soft, haunting glow illuminated its form, a gaunt silhouette draped in tattered clothing with hair that seemed to float around it, ageless and ethereal. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me as it raised an arm, beckoning me to come closer. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I was paralyzed, caught in the wraith's gaze. "Come," it whispered, the sound ethereal, filled with both sadness and rage. "You can help me. Us." Suddenly, a flood of images rushed into my mind, visions of the townsfolk's fearful faces, shadows cast by the flickering lights in their homes, stories of lost ones, lives taken too soon, secrets buried deep. I staggered back, realizing with horror that the entity before me was not merely a creature of folklore. It was a manifestation of all the pain and suffering that lingered like a ghost over Black Hollow. The ground beneath me felt unstable. The trees seemed to bend closer, listening intently as the wraith reached out with its other hand, fingers stretching toward me in an unsettling invitation. I turned and ran, the echoes of its voice trailing behind me, growing fainter but more desperate. "Help us." I sprinted back through the woods, branches clawing at my skin, each step echoing with the weight of unspoken tragedies. When I reached my house, I slammed the door behind me, panting, feeling a cold sweat trickle down my spine. I locked the door, though I knew it wouldn't keep the nightmares at bay. They were already inside me, feeding on my fears, my guilt. Days turned into restless nights filled with visions of the wraith, its sorrowful eyes haunting my thoughts, urging me to unearth the truth of Black Hollow's past. The oppressive stillness of the town grew heavier, and I began to notice how the locals avoided me, their conversations stalling when I walked by, eyes averted, as if I were a ghost myself. Driven by a need to understand, I found an old tome at the library, dusty and hidden away, detailing the history of Black Hollow, a town built on secrets. Within its pages, I uncovered the stories of those who had vanished, lost to the river and to time, their souls tethered to the winding waters of Willow Creek. The realization hit me hard. The wraith was not just a legend, but a soul bound by grief, seeking closure, a reckoning for the injustices left unresolved. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood red, I returned to Willow Creek armed with the knowledge I had gleaned. The air was thick with anticipation. I called out to the wraith. "I know your pain. I am here to help." The forest fell silent, the wind urging me forward. As the water shimmered before me, the wraith emerged once more, its gaze piercing through me. I began to speak the names of the lost, weaving their stories into the cool night air, promising to honor their memories, to ensure they would not be forgotten. With each name, I felt the weight of the wraith's sorrow lift, a soft light flickering in its eyes. "Thank you," it whispered, its voice now a muted echo. The essence of the woods around us shimmered, and for the first time, I felt a sense of peace engulf the clearing. Slowly, the wraith began to dissolve, fading into the moonlit mist, leaving behind a breath of warm air, a testament to the stories untold now finding their rest. I returned to town a changed person, empowered by the understanding of the past and committed to sharing the tales long buried. Black Hollow, once steeped in shadows, slowly began to breathe again, the stories sung and the lost remembered. But I knew as I looked out at the winding waters of Willow Creek that the echoes of the past would always linger, whispering in the rustle of the leaves, reminding the townsfolk that the history of their land was not just a story to be feared, but one to be cherished and honored forevermore. It was a cold autumn evening when I first noticed the subtle changes in my home, an old Victorian house steeped in history and mystery. I had just moved in, eager for a fresh start after a messy divorce, the wind howling outside as the sun set, casting elongated shadows across the dimly lit rooms. The first week was quiet. It didn't take long for me to settle into a routine, my days filled with unpacking boxes and my nights haunted by the echoes of my own thoughts. It was on the 8th night that I first heard it, a faint whisper, like a soft breeze passing through the cracks of the old windows. At first, I dismissed it as the house settling or merely my overactive imagination coaxed by loneliness. But each night, the whispers grew louder, weaving around me like an invisible fog, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. On the 10th night, I lay in bed, heart pounding, when I heard a distinct voice. It was a low murmur, barely audible yet filled with a desperate urgency, calling my name. "Sarah! Sarah!" I sat up sharply, breath hitching in my throat. I turned on the bedside lamp, illuminating the familiar contours of my room, but the shadows cast by the light looked deeper, more menacing. I shook my head, trying to rationalize it. Perhaps it was a trick of the mind, a manifestation of my vulnerability. But the next day, as I explored the corners of my home, I stumbled upon an old photograph tucked away in a dusty drawer, a picture of a woman who resembled me in an uncanny way except for the haunted expression in her eyes. The date written on the back was from decades prior, 1932. Unease gnawed at my gut as I began to dig deeper, researching the house's history and local archives. The woman in the photograph was Margaret Flannery, the last occupant of the house before it fell into disrepair. I learned that she had been found under mysterious circumstances, malnourished and delirious, her screams echoing through the neighborhood before she vanished into obscurity. Each night thereafter, the whispers persisted, insistent yet sorrowful, and I began to feel a connection to Margaret, as if she were pulling me into her dark history. I tried to silence the voices by drowning them out with music and light, but they only grew stronger, a relentless tide crashing against my sanity. One evening, overwhelmed by an inexplicable compulsion, I found myself standing at the attic door, sheer dread swirling in my belly. The air felt heavier as I ascended the creaking stairs, and upon entering, I was met with an oppressive silence that felt thicker than the dust motes drifting in the dwindling light. The attic was cluttered with forgotten memories, old furniture, boxes filled with yellowing pages, and a small, ornate mirror that caught my eye. Approaching it, I was drawn in by its beauty, but the reflection staring back at me was not entirely my own. Staring into the glass, I saw Margaret, her eyes glimmering with a haunting sadness, and she reached out as if to touch the surface. My heart raced as the whispers intensified, forming coherent words for the first time. "Help me. Please, help me." Paralyzed by fear and fascination, I touched the mirror, the cool glass meeting my palm, and instantly, the room spun. Shadows flickering like candle flames. In that moment, I was transported into a memory that was not my own, a scene of a dimly lit room where Margaret was shackled, her cries echoing through the night as she faced an unseen tormentor. It played out like a nightmare, the terror flooding my senses, and just as suddenly, I was back in the attic, breathless and disoriented. The whispers had stopped, and a heavy stillness enveloped me, yet I felt compelled to act. The next morning, I contacted the local historical society and shared my findings, and together, we uncovered a forgotten tale of madness, betrayal, and loss that had seeped into the very foundations of the house. Weeks passed, and with each revelation, the whispers transformed into a mournful sigh, the energy in the house shifting as I began to honor Margaret's story, lighting candles, speaking her name, and acknowledging her pain. As the season turned, I noticed that the house felt lighter, the shadows less oppressive. It was then that I realized that while I had moved to escape my past, I had also stumbled into a different kind of healing, one where I could finally confront my fears in the darkness that once engulfed me. With each story told and each prayer whispered, the spirit of Margaret seemed to fade gently, her presence shifting from one of sorrow to gratitude before finally becoming a whisper in the wind. Only then did I understand that some horrors linger not in the walls of our homes, but in the remnants of unresolved lives, waiting for someone to listen, to remember, and to set them free. Late one evening, I found myself in a small, crumbling house that I had inherited from my estranged grandmother, a woman I barely knew but who had always intrigued me. The aroma of damp wood and old memories filled the air as I stepped through the front door, the creak of the floorboards echoing in the stillness. As I wandered through the dimly lit rooms, dust motes danced in the sparse light, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching me, its walls steeped in whispers of the past. My grandmother had been reclusive, a woman rumored to have dabbled in dark arts, and I had come interested in not just the property but the secrets it held. That first night, I decided to explore the attic, a place I had always been warned to avoid. The rickety stairs creaked under my weight, the air growing colder with each step I took. I reached the attic door, its wood rough and splintered, and felt a shiver run down my spine as I pushed it open. Stale air blasted me, carrying a scent of decay and something else, something metallic. The attic was a chaotic jumble of old furniture, boxes overflowing with forgotten trinkets, and shadows that seemed to pulse with life. I flicked on a dying light bulb which buzzed and flickered, casting eerie shapes across the walls. As I began rummaging through the boxes, I came across a tattered journal, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was shaky but legible, filled with frantic scrawls and bizarre drawings that depicted grotesque figures and symbols that made my skin crawl. Flipping through the pages, I felt an insatiable curiosity until I stumbled upon a passage that chilled me to the bone. My grandmother had written about a ritual, one she believed could bind souls to the earthly realm, explaining her fascination with the other side and her fear of the spirits that might linger. The more I read, the more I felt enveloped by an inexplicable weight, as if the very air around me thickened with sorrow and despair. Just as I reached the last entry, a sudden chill swept through the attic, snuffing the light and casting me into darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my phone, trying to illuminate the room with its weak glow. Just then, I heard a sound, soft but distinct, a whisper, barely audible, like a voice carried on a breath of wind. "Help me." My heart raced. I could hardly comprehend what I had just heard. The whisper echoed again, a pleading cry that sliced through the silence. I stood frozen, every instinct telling me to flee, yet I was rooted to the spot. Compelled by a force I couldn't understand, I ventured deeper into the shadows, where the darkness pooled ominously. Just as my phone's light cast a weak beam ahead, I saw them, faint outlines, swirling just beyond the reach of illumination, shadows that twisted and writhed with a life of their own. They were less than human, their features distorted and eyes hollow with a longing that made my skin crawl. I stumbled backward in terror, realizing they were trapped souls, echoes of a time long past, bound by the very ritual my grandmother had described. In that moment, I understood that every entry in the journal was not merely accounts of her experiments. They were warnings, veiled as attempts to uncover the truth. I turned to flee, adrenaline pumping through me, but the shadows surged closer, whispers rising to a chorus of desperate cries. "Don't leave us," they wailed, their voices crescendoing in a cacophony that filled the space with anguish. I raced for the staircase, my heart pounding like a drum, and the shadows clawed at me, yearning to hold me back, to add me to their sorrowful tapestry. As I reached the stairs, the darkness seemed to lurch and swell, and I could feel icy fingers grazing my arms, pulling, trying to drag me into the void. I managed to burst through the attic door and slammed it shut, pressing my back against it as the whispers faded to frantic murmurs. With great effort, I made my way out of the house, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the cool night air hitting my face like a rush of clarity. I drove away, vowing never to return, leaving behind the secrets that had claimed my grandmother and destined to haunt the edges of my mind forever. Though the house was now in the distance, I could still hear the whispers, a chilling reminder of what lies in the shadows and the price of uncovering truths meant to stay buried. I sometimes wonder if the whispers were merely a figment of my imagination or if they were a forewarning, a connection to the dark legacy I escaped but could never truly leave behind. It was a rainy evening when I decided to visit my late grandmother's old house, a place that had always been cloaked in an unsettling air. Years had passed since she passed, and the house had remained untouched, frozen in time, as if it were waiting for something or someone. My childhood memories were a mix of warmth and unease, the kind of place that blurred the lines between comfort and dread. The locals spoke in hushed tones about the house, often sharing stories of strange occurrences, but I brushed them off as mere exaggerations. Yet, deep down, I had a tingling sense of foreboding as my car pulled into the overgrown driveway. The moment I stepped out, the air felt thick, almost charged, as if the world held its breath. I approached the front door, which groaned on its rusty hinges when I pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior cloaked in dust and shadows. The familiar scent of old wood mixed with something musty enveloped me. I took a hesitant step inside, my shoes crunching on the debris littered across the floor. The echo of my footsteps felt distinctly out of place in a house that had once been filled with life and laughter. As I wandered room by room, nostalgia washed over me, flooded with memories of family gatherings and stories told in flickering candlelight. I entered the living room, where a grand fireplace stared back at me, dressed in layers of cobwebs, as if time had simply forgotten to turn the warmth down. Then, I noticed a large portrait of my grandmother hanging on the wall. Her eyes seemed to follow me, and in that moment, a chill coursed through my spine. I shivered, brushing the hair from my face, reminding myself that it was just a painting, just a memory captured in time. I ventured into the kitchen, where the memories of her warm cookies and gentle laughter haunted the air. The wooden spoon still hung from nails on the wall, an eerie reminder that some things remain. Suddenly, a soft noise interrupted my thoughts, a faint creak coming from the upstairs landing. My heart raced. A part of me wanted to flee, to dismiss it as the old house settling, but curiosity urged me onward. I climbed the staircase, each step moaning under my weight. The dim light from the window struggled to cut through the shadows that clung to the walls. As I reached the top, the creaking stopped, replaced by a deep silence that seemed to swallow the very essence of the house. I hesitated before approaching the first door on my left, a small room that used to be my playroom. The doorknob felt cold against my palm as I twisted it slowly. The door swung open with a soft whine, revealing a room consumed by darkness. My heart raced as I stepped inside, a chill wrapping around me like a vice. I flipped the light switch, but nothing happened, of course. The electricity had long ago been cut off. I felt my way through the familiar space, my fingertips gliding over the dusty surfaces that once held my toys. It was then I heard it again, a faint whisper, almost like a soft giggle. I froze. It felt too close, too palpable to be an echo of my imagination. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice trembled, a stark contrast to the confidence I had conjured to enter this desolate space. No answer came, but the giggle echoed again, this time slightly louder, more distinct, as if it were taunting me. Gathering my resolve, I stepped further into the room, tuning into the shadows that danced across the walls. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me with a force that caused dust to plume in the air, and panic surged through my veins. I rushed to the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped, the laughter now filling the air, encircling me like a mocking embrace. My breath quickened. I pounded on the door, calling out in desperation, "Let me out, please." My heart felt like it was beating out of my chest as I realized the whispers grew louder, morphing into a cacophony of twisted voices. The shadows in the corners of the room shifted, and suddenly, a chill washed over me, freezing my resolve. I turned to see a figure emerging from the darkness, a small child with hollow eyes and a sinister grin stretching across her face. I stumbled back, my heart racing as the figure stepped closer, its laughter echoing off the walls with haunting familiarity. I knew this child. She was a friend from my past who had vanished long ago, lost to a tragedy I barely understood. "Why did you leave? Why did you forget me?" she whispered, her voice a chilling reminder of innocence turned dark. Terror gripped me. I had to escape, but no matter how hard I shoved, the door wouldn't budge. I felt the walls closing in, and the last remnants of rational thought slipped through my fingers. As the figure approached, a wave of memories surged through me, her laughter from happier times twisted into something malevolent. She reached out, and I could feel the coldness emanating from her like a grave. I braced myself for the inevitable, the darkness swallowing me whole as the laughter crescendoed into a deafening silence. And then I was jerked awake on the living room floor, heart racing, drenched in sweat. Had it all been a dream? The house stood silent, the shadows lurking just beyond the corners of sight. But the feeling of being watched remained, an uncomfortable reminder that perhaps some doors are best left closed, and some memories are too terrifying to confront. I looked around frantically, desperate for any sign that I wasn't alone. As I stood up, a soft echo of laughter drifted through the unnaturally still air, filling the room with a weight that pressed on my chest. The house, it seemed, wasn't finished with me yet. I stumbled toward the door, the overwhelming urge to flee surging through me. But as I stepped toward the exit, I hesitated, my hand resting on the doorknob. Was it in my imagination? Or was that laughter softer now, more pleading than before? I hesitated once more, caught between the urge to escape and the need to understand the specters of my past. Finally, I turned back, standing in the middle of the room, breathing heavily. "I'm here," I whispered. "I won't forget you." The laughter faded, replaced by a heavy silence that seemed to settle like dust. In that moment, I realized the weight of the past cannot be escaped. It must be faced, no matter the horror it holds. And as I left the house that night, I knew I would return again to unravel the threads of a past woven too tightly into the fabric of my being, knowing the shadows would always linger, waiting for the next brave soul to step through the door. Growing up, I always considered myself to be an avid explorer, the kind of kid who would venture into the woods behind my house just to see what secrets they held. They were thick and ancient, filled with towering trees that loomed like sentinels over the small clearing where I built my forts and imaginary kingdoms. My friends and I would spend countless afternoons getting lost in the thicket, but as we grew older, the thrill of the woods faded, leaving only memories and remnants of our childhood. Yet, there was one part of those woods that always filled me with unease. It was known among us as the Whispering Grove, a patch of trees that seemed to murmur among themselves when the wind blew. Older kids told stories about it, always ending with the same warning: don't go there after dark. Naturally, the moment I turned 14, curiosity got the better of my logic. I decided to sneak out one night, determined to debunk the spooky tales. The moon was high, casting an eerie silver glow, and the trees seemed to twist and contort into sinister shapes. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and youthful bravado, I ventured deeper into the woods, my heart racing with excitement. As I neared the Whispering Grove, the air grew dense, thick with anticipation. The whispers intensified, becoming a chorus of hushed voices that danced around me. I stood at the edge, my flashlight flickering uncertainly, illuminating the twisted roots and gnarled trunks. The very air felt charged, almost electric, as if the trees were alive, watching, waiting. I took a deep breath and stepped into the grove, each footfall echoing unnaturally against the silence. The moment I crossed the threshold, the whispers turned into distinct words, urging me deeper. Stay, just a little longer. My skin prickled, a sense of dread creeping in. I shook my head, dismissing it as my imagination running wild. I pressed on, the flashlight beam cutting through the shadows, illuminating strange symbols carved into the bark of the trees, runes I had never seen before. They seemed to pulse, alive with some unseen energy. Suddenly, I heard a rustle behind me. My heart stopped. I turned, shining the flashlight into the darkness. But there was nothing there, only the rustling leaves. I forced myself to breathe, convincing myself it was just an animal. But the whispers became insistent, wrapping around me like a cloak. Join us, stay with us. They were no longer vague sounds. The voices were clear and urgent. I turned to leave, just as panic set in, but that's when I noticed something strange. The entrance, the path I had taken, was gone. I felt a wave of nausea hit me, and for a moment, I was disoriented. The trees stood tall and imposing, their branches stretching out like skeletal fingers. I tried to retrace my steps, but the ground seemed to shift beneath me. Every turn I took felt like a step deeper into a labyrinth. The whispers grew louder, forming a cacophony that felt almost like laughter. Stay, forever, I stumbled, my heart racing, feeling the chill of despair seep into my bones. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick with a malevolence that gripped my throat. I ran, adrenaline coursing through my veins, desperate to escape the clutches of whatever the grove had become. But no matter how fast I ran, the trees shifted and morphed around me, their twisted branches closing in like a trap. I was lost, completely lost. I felt tears stream down my face, mixing with the fear that consumed me. Just when I thought I would collapse from exhaustion, I saw a faint light in the distance. Hope surged within me as I sprinted towards it, praying it would lead me out of this nightmare. As I got closer, I realized it was the moon, shimmering through a small clearing. With one last burst of energy, I pushed through the dense brush, emerging into the pale light. But when I turned around, the whispering grove was gone. The trees were normal, the ominous atmosphere lifted. I was back in the familiar part of the woods, disoriented and trembling. I stumbled home, not stopping until I was safely inside, locking the door behind me. I never spoke of that night or the voices that haunted me. Days turned into weeks, then months, yet the memory lingered like a shadow. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, I could still hear the whispers tugging at the edges of my mind, reminding me of what I had encountered. I could never shake the feeling that the grove was still out there, waiting for me to return, to join the chorus of those who had been lost before me. I vowed never to step into those woods again, fearing the day that the whispers might become too tempting to resist, a day when I'd find myself drawn back, again and again, into the depths of the whispering grove. It started one unsuspecting evening when I decided to stay late at the office to wrap up a project that had consumed my every waking hour for weeks. The building was an older structure, filled with creaking floors and dimly lit hallways, though it lingered with a strange charm. As the clock struck 11, the overhead fluorescent lights hummed, casting flickering shadows across my workspace. The silence was profound, almost tangible, broken only by the sound of my fingers tapping against the keyboard, each keystroke echoing in the stillness. I grabbed my coat and prepared to leave, the drumming of the rain against the windows urging me to rush. But just then, I noticed a file had slipped off my desk, its contents scattering across the floor. As I bent down to gather the papers, I heard something, a whisper. It was faint, almost like the rustling of leaves, but distinct enough that it sent a shiver up my spine. I paused, scanning the empty office, the air thick with an unsettling energy. Just the wind, I reassured myself, shaking off the growing unease that clung to me. Pushing the thought aside, I collected the scattered documents and grabbed my bag, my keys jangling nervously as I stepped into the dimly lit hallway. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and I felt a strange chill wrap around me. It was late, too late, and I was alone, a sensation I usually found comforting, but that night felt heavy with anticipation. The isolation of the building seemed palpable, as if the walls were closing in around me, suffocating in silence. I quickened my pace, eager to reach the safety of the exit. As I exited onto the staircase, I heard it again, a soft, hushed voice murmuring just out of earshot, too distant to make out, yet close enough to set my heart racing. I froze, listening intently, hoping it was just a trick of my ears, the exhaustion playing games with my mind. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing back at me, unanswered. I forced myself to move, my heart pounding in rhythm with my footsteps as I descended the stairs, each one creaking under my weight. Upon reaching the ground floor, I felt an overwhelming urge to run, but I kept my composure, reminding myself there were no ghosts in the office, no haunting shadows lurking in the corners. My mind was playing tricks on me. Just as I approached the exit, that whisper returned, clearer this time, and unmistakably calling my name. "Help me." I froze again, a cold sweat breaking out across my back, and adrenaline surged through me like ice fire. Summoning my courage, I pushed open the heavy door, the night air biting at my skin as I stepped outside. But just as I turned to leave, an image flashed through my mind, a fleeting reflection in the glass of the door. I gasped and spun around, but there was nothing, just the empty office behind me. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching, waiting just out of sight. I mentally scolded myself, attributing it to fatigue and the lateness of the hour, assuring myself I needed to get home, to sleep, to wake up and view the world with fresh eyes. When I finally arrived home, I locked the door behind me, but the unsettling feeling lingered, an inexplicable dread that coiled around my chest. I tried to shake it off while I made myself some tea, but every creak of the floorboards sounded amplified in the stillness of my small apartment. I convinced myself it was just the house settling, the wind howling through the eaves. As I crawled into bed, I closed my eyes tightly, attempting to force away the memories of the night, the lingering threat of an unseen presence. But sleep eluded me, and the feeling of eyes upon me persisted. Hours passed in restless tossing and turning until I finally drifted into a fitful sleep. Then the dreams came. Dark, twisted dreams of the office. The shadows were longer, the whispers clearer. I saw figures moving just outside my vision, their twisted shapes beckoning me closer. Each time I reached for them, they would dissolve like mist, but the sensation remained, like fingers brushing against my skin. Morning came, breaking the haze of night, yet the fear clung to me. I tried to shake it off, to push it aside, but the more I tried, the stronger it became. I returned to work, aware that I would have to face that empty office again. When evening fell, I braced myself for the descent into the quiet darkness, convincing myself it had all been a figment of my imagination. Yet as before, the anxiety returned, flooding my senses as the shadows elongated. Once again, I lingered alone in that desolate office. The whispers began anew, and this time they felt urgent, insistent. Help me. My heart raced, and I hesitated, torn between the logical part of my brain urging me to leave and the strange pull of the voice, pulling me deeper into the darkness of the building. I decided to confront this unexplainable presence, my pulse pounding in my ears. I followed the whispers, leading me through the familiar hallways into a rarely used storage room at the end of the corridor. The door creaked open, revealing boxes stacked haphazardly, gathering dust in their corners. I felt emotions swirl around me: sadness, desperation, fear. It felt alive. Unable to resist further, I stepped inside, and that's when I saw it: a paper, yellowed and crumpled, lying atop a stack of outdated files. With trembling hands, I reached for the paper. As I unfolded it, the name scrawled across the top sent chills down my spine. It was an employee who had worked there years before me, reported missing after staying late one fateful night. The realization hit me like a tidal wave, and suddenly, the voice felt closer than ever. Help me, it called again, echoing through the room, and I experienced a horrifying clarity. The tragedy of that lost soul was sealed in that very space, forever echoing in its silence. I ran from that room, up the stairs, down the corridors, fleeing the grasp of the past. But as I glanced back one last time, I could have sworn I saw a shadowy figure standing in the doorway, watching me go. The emotional weight of that life lost, those whispers that begged for salvation, shackled to the walls of a forgotten office space, became an indelible imprint on my mind. Never returned to the office again. I left that job. Not just for my sanity, but to release the tormented spirit I felt bound to. In hindsight, I often wonder what happened to that employee, how their story was lost to time, and whether the whispers still linger in the hallways, waiting for the next soul to hear their call. The true horror lies in the realization that sometimes the past longs to be heard, and some voices never truly rest. It was a late autumn evening when I decided to take a solitary walk through the woods behind my childhood home. The trees, stripped bare by the season, stood like skeletal sentinels, their branches twisting against the darkening sky. I had often walked these paths as a child, the sounds of rustling leaves and distant animal calls my only companions, but now, as an adult, the woods felt different, darker somehow. The weight of the silence pressed in on me, and I could hear the soft crunch of the leaves underfoot echoing like a heartbeat. I remembered the stories my grandmother shared about these woods, tales of strange happenings and those who had vanished without a trace. I had always dismissed them as mere folklore. After all, what could possibly lie in wait in a familiar forest? But that evening, as shadows lengthened around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I picked up my pace, brushing off the goosebumps that prickled my skin, convincing myself it was just the chill of the autumn air. As I stepped deeper into the woods, I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin, one I had never seen before. Curiosity clawed at me, and despite a voice in my head urging caution, I drew closer. The door hung ajar, creaking ominously in the wind. I peered inside, the darkness beyond swallowing the fading light. It felt as if the air within was different, charged with an unsettling energy. I stepped over the threshold, the wooden floor groaning under my weight, each creak a whisper of warnings long forgotten. Dust motes danced in the limited light that filtered through grime-covered windows, and cobwebs draped the corners, thick and heavy like shrouds. As I ventured further inside, I noticed strange symbols carved into the walls, their meanings lost to time, but clearly etched with purpose. A chill coursed through me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I was not alone. My heart raced as I spun around, scanning the room. The claustrophobic silence was broken only by the sound of my own breathing. Just then, I heard a noise, a soft rustling from behind the cabin. I cautiously approached the window, heart pounding, peering through the grime. What I saw made me freeze. A figure stood there, cloaked in shadow, their features obscured. My instincts screamed at me to flee, but an inexplicable force held me in place. The figure remained still, as if waiting for something, or someone. As if sensing my gaze, it turned ever so slightly, and for a split second, I caught a glimpse of its face. pale and hollow, eyes sunken deep into lifeless sockets. A primal fear gripped my throat, and I stumbled back, heart hammering in my chest. I turned to leave, but as I did, I heard a soft whisper that seemed to seep from the very walls, chilling and insistent. "Stay with us." It echoed around me, wrapping me in an icy embrace. I ran. The door slammed shut behind me as I bolted from the cabin, branches clawing at my clothes, the underbrush fighting against my frantic escape. I didn't stop until I was back on familiar ground, breathless and trembling. But relief was short-lived. Over the next few weeks, an unease settled in my bones. The woods seemed to beckon me, the shadows longer, the nights deeper. I avoided that haunted cabin, but the image of that figure haunted my dreams, always standing just beyond the reach of light, calling me with whispers that sliced through the darkness. I told myself it was just my imagination running wild, yet every time I closed my eyes, I could hear its voice urging me to return, promising secrets that lay buried beneath the ground. Eventually, curiosity overpowered my fear. I found myself standing before the cabin again, the air thick with foreboding. This time, the door was wide open, as if inviting me in. With resolve I didn't feel, I crossed the threshold once more. The atmosphere inside was charged, electric. Whispers filled the air, swirling around me, a chorus of voices pleading, beckoning. I had to know what lay within the heart of the darkness. As I stepped further inside, the symbols on the walls glowed faintly, illuminating a ritual circle in the center of the room. In that moment, I understood this place was a conduit, a gateway. The figure reappeared, materializing from the shadows. It reached out, fingers stretched toward me, and I felt an overwhelming pull, as if the very essence of the forest writhed beneath my feet, begging for me to join them, to succumb to whatever fate awaited. I was terrified, yet a part of me longed to give in. But just as the darkness threatened to consume me, a memory flickered in my mind. The warmth of my grandmother's arms, her stories, the wisdom in her eyes warning of things best left undisturbed. With a surge of willpower, I broke free from the figure's grasp, stumbling backward. The whispers crescendoed into a chaotic roar, the walls shimmering as if the very cabin itself resented my defiance. I fled, my heart pounding in my chest, the cabin collapsing behind me as I tore through the woods. I emerged on the other side, breathless and wide-eyed, the sun peeking over the horizon as if to welcome me back to reality. I never returned to that place, but the whispers still haunt me in the stillness of night, a reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the veil of familiarity. I know the woods hold secrets, and they will always call to me, but I have learned to resist the urge to listen. I moved away, but part of me remains tethered to that haunting place, forever altered by a truth better left unspoken. That night, I left the woods behind, but I carried the weight of the darkness within me, knowing that the whispers of the forest would echo in my mind for as long as I lived. It was a cold autumn night when I found myself driving down a backcountry road, the kind that snaked through dense woods, with branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I was on my way to visit an old friend who had invited me to his secluded cabin for the weekend. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the last traces of light faded, and darkness enveloped the surroundings. The headlights of my car barely pierced the inky blackness. The GPS chimed as it instructed me to turn onto an unmarked dirt road. Despite my unease, I followed the directions, the tires kicking up gravel as I ventured deeper into isolation. Trees towered around me, creating a tunnel of shadows. I could almost hear them whispering secrets, their leaves rustling softly in the wind. Moments later, the road narrowed and became bumpy, but I pressed on, the excitement of reconnecting with an old friend outweighing my growing apprehensions. After what felt like an eternity, I finally spotted the cabin nestled between the trees. Smoke billowed from the chimney, and the warm glow of light seeped through the windows, inviting me inside. I parked and stepped out, the air crisp and filled with the earthy scent of fallen leaves. My friend, Mark, greeted me with a hearty laugh, pulling me into a bear hug as I shivered slightly. We settled inside by the fireplace, sharing stories and laughing as the fire crackled. The cabin felt cozy, a stark contrast to the eerie wilderness outside. However, as midnight approached, An unsettling feeling crept into my gut. Mark had mentioned the woods being strange, filled with folklore about spirits and entities that roamed after dark. I dismissed it as drunken tales, but something about the stillness around us felt off. After drinking a few beers, Mark excused himself to grab more wood from outside, leaving me alone in the dim light. I could hear the wind howling, its mournful calls seeping through the walls. I tried to shake off the growing anxiety, but soon found my gaze drifting towards the window. Outside, the moon shone brightly, illuminating the surroundings, but it felt different, too bright, almost as if the shadows were more pronounced. I blinked and noticed movement just beyond the trees. At first, I thought it might be a deer, but the shape was too tall, too human-like. I squinted, trying to discern what it was. It stood still, watching. Shivers ran down my spine as I recalled tales of watchers from the woods. Suddenly, I heard Mark's laughter, and I remembered I wasn't alone, yet I felt an overwhelming urge to scream at him to come inside. A minute passed, and an uneasy silence settled around me. I stood up, my heart racing, and made my way to the door, squinting at the dark figure that still loomed just out of sight. I called out to Mark, but no response came. I stumbled outside, the cold nipping at my skin, hoping to find him. My eyes scanned the area, but all I found was an oppressive silence broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves. I took a few cautious steps into the woods, calling his name louder. What felt like a moment turned into an eternity as I wandered further in, dread creeping into my mind like the fog rolling in. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. It didn't sound like anything I had ever heard before, and suddenly panic gripped me. I bolted back towards the cabin, my feet pounding against the forest floor, branches snagging at my clothes. As I reached the door, I flung it open, slamming it shut behind me. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone to call Mark, but the screen flickered, revealing no service. The laughter I had heard before now felt sinister, echoing in my mind. Moments later, the door creaked, and I felt a heavy presence behind it. I braced myself, heart hammering in my chest, and slowly turned to face the door, half expecting it to burst open. A moment stretched into eternity, and then a soft knock echoed through the room. With a shaky breath, I opened the door a crack. But it wasn't Mark. Instead, it was a figure shrouded in darkness, its eyes glinting like cold steel. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't human, it couldn't be. I slammed the door shut and bolted the lock, praying it wouldn't find its way inside. It began to scratch and claw at the door, its nails like talons. I backed away, retreating to the far corner of the cabin. I felt dizzy as panic threatened to overwhelm me. But then, I heard my name, Mark's voice, muffled and distorted from outside. "Let me in. It's hell out here." I hesitated, torn between the necessity of companionship and the primal instinct to hide from the thing beyond the threshold. I opened the door just a crack, peering into the darkness. A hand reached through, clasping around my wrist, a strong grip. It was Mark, disheveled and pale, with wide eyes filled with terror. "What the hell did you encounter? We need to leave." He yanked me outside, and I stumbled into the night, glancing back at the cabin one last time as I felt the air grow heavy with foreboding. We ran, not stopping to look back, the woods swallowing our screams as the haunting sounds of the thing echoed behind us. By dawn, we made it to my car, breathless and aching, but we never spoke of what happened that night again. The woods never released their secrets, and as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Something remained hidden, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next unsuspecting traveler. And every now and then, I catch myself glancing back, half expecting to see those cold, glinting eyes watching me from the woods, reminding me that some horrors are best left undisturbed. I never thought a simple road trip could lead to something so horrific, but sometimes the most innocent plans can take a turn for the worse. It started on a Saturday morning. I was filled with excitement as my friends and I piled into my car, setting off for a weekend getaway to a remote cabin in the woods. The drive was filled with laughter, music blaring, and an overwhelming feeling of freedom as we left the city behind. As dusk settled in, we reached our destination, a charming, albeit isolated cabin that seemed to radiate a rustic charm. Surrounded by towering trees, it appeared like something out of a storybook. After unpacking and settling in, we gathered around a fire pit, roasting marshmallows and sharing ghost stories. The atmosphere was perfect, but a nagging sensation tugged at me. I brushed it off, choosing instead to enjoy the company of my friends. As the night stretched on, we decided to take a walk through the woods, armed with flashlights and a sense of adventure. The forest was alive with sounds, the crackle of leaves underfoot, the distant rustle of wildlife, and the occasional hoot of an owl. But then came an unsettling silence, a stark contrast that sent shivers down my spine. "Do you guys feel that?" I asked, hesitating. A wave of discomfort swept over our group, but curiosity kept us moving deeper into the woods. Moments later, we stumbled upon what looked like an old, decaying house, hidden behind a curtain of trees as if it had been waiting for us. Vines crawled up its weathered walls, and shattered windows gaped like empty eye sockets. "Let's check it out," one of my friends urged, and against my better judgment, the group agreed. The door creaked open, revealing an interior cloaked in shadows. Dust motes danced in the beams of our flashlights as we stepped inside. The air was thick and musty, filled with an unsettling silence that echoed our every move. As we explored room after room, we found remnants of a life left behind, tattered furniture, ornate but forlorn decor, and faded photographs that seemed to watch us with a disquieting gaze. Unease settled deeper in my stomach, but I tried to shake it off. It was just an old house, after all. But then we found something that made me freeze. Hidden in a corner, we stumbled upon a locked door, its frame splintered and worn. "Let's open it," someone suggested, excitement dancing in their voice. Against my instinct, we managed to pry it open with a rusty crowbar we found nearby. The door swung wide, revealing a small basement filled with bizarre artifacts, old dolls, broken toys, and strange symbols etched into the stone walls. It felt like a shrine to something dark, something that had no place in a house like this. A chill gripped my heart as I scanned the room. That's when I noticed something moving in the shadows. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. My friends seemed oblivious, laughing and chatting as if we were still in the safe confines of the cabin. But I felt it. Someone, or something, was watching us. Panic seized me, and I backed away from the room. "Guys, I think we should go," I urged. Some of my friends shrugged, still mesmerized by the strange objects around. But just as I turned to leave, a low, guttural growl echoed from the depths of the basement. My heart raced as I whipped around, my flashlight trembling in my grip. "We need to leave now," I shouted, adrenaline surging. Finally, sensing the urgency in my voice, my friends followed me back upstairs. As we sprinted through the darkened house, we heard something crashing behind us, something heavier than any of us could fathom. Bursting through the door, we stumbled into the moonlight of the clearing, gasping for breath. The cabin felt like a sanctuary as we rushed inside, slamming the door behind us. We locked it, hearts pounding in unison. The laughter from earlier had vanished, replaced by an oppressive silence. As we sat huddled together, whispers crept into our discussions. Was it real, or had we let our imaginations run wild? But deep down, we all felt it, the palpable dread that what we encountered wasn't just a figment of our collective fears. A sudden thud against the door sent us spiraling back into panic. It wasn't over. The growling, low and guttural, emerged once again, echoing through the woods as if taunting us. The night dragged on, filled with chilling sounds and a sense of impending doom. As morning light filtered through the trees, we dared to peek outside. The house was quiet, but as we gathered ourselves to leave, something caught my eye, a small, weathered doll lying face down on the porch. The same doll I had seen in the basement. Trembling, I reached for it, realizing too late that it came with a price that would haunt me forever. We left that place in haste, but the experience never left my mind. It changed me, leaving an indelible mark on my soul. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that something followed us home, lurking in the dark corners of my mind. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear whispers and the faint sound of a growl. I often wonder if the darkness we stumbled upon in that cabin still lies out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting group to awaken its horrors. As dusk settled over the town, casting an eerie glow through the cracked window panes, I found myself alone in a sprawling, century-old house inherited from my late grandmother. The weight of her passing hung heavy in the air, an invisible shroud of grief that wrapped around me, tightening with each creak of the aged floorboards. I had always felt a strange connection to this place, yet never fully understood its history until that fateful night. Determined to preserve her memory, I set to work unpacking boxes filled with dusty relics, each item steeped in time and nostalgia. Among them, I discovered an old journal, its leather cover worn, the pages yellowed and fragile. The delicate script, penned in my grandmother's hand, spoke of her childhood, of a time when innocence reigned, but beneath the surface, I sensed a thread of darkness woven into her stories. One passage snared my attention, a brief mention of an abandoned well at the edge of the property, hidden by overgrown weeds and shadows. The words were laced with a strange urgency, as if she implored the reader not to forget what lay beneath the surface, not to venture too close. That night, sleep evaded me as I lay in my grandmother's old bed, her floral quilt heavy upon me, yet I felt oddly light, as if the stories from the journal flitted among the dust motes in the air. The house whispered its secrets in the stillness, and I shivered as I imagined the past encircling me like a suffocating cloak, urging me to uncover its mysteries. My curiosity ignited a flame of determination. At dawn, I would seek out the well. Morning arrived in muted shades, the sunlight filtering through the trees, and I stepped outside, heart pounding with both excitement and trepidation. I made my way through the tangled underbrush, guided by the pull of my grandmother's words. Each step felt like a descent into the unknown, the air thick with tension that wrapped around my throat. When I finally stumbled upon the well, I was taken aback. It looked ancient, the stones uneven and covered in moss that clung to the surface like a memory refusing to fade. The opening was choked with foliage, nature's desperate attempt to hide what lay beneath. With trembling hands, I cleared the brush, revealing dark water that glimmered beneath the surface, beckoning like a long-lost friend. The atmosphere thickened, an unshakable sense of dread creeping in, and I pulled back momentarily, rooted in place by an unseen force. I remembered my grandmother's words and hesitated, feeling the weight of her warning rumble through my thoughts. But the lure was too strong, an irresistible siren call that tugged at the corners of my mind. Leaning closer, I peered into the depths, the darkness swirling with an unnatural energy. Then suddenly, a face appeared, pale and disfigured, floating just beneath the surface, eyes wide and unblinking. I stumbled backward, breath hitching in my throat, my heart racing as adrenaline surged through my veins. An overwhelming sense of terror enveloped me. The figure was unmistakably human, yet something about it felt wrong, twisted, as if it had been pulled from the depths of a nightmare. I fell to the ground, scrambling away from the haunting visage that had surfaced from my subconscious, a specter of all the stories I'd been told growing up, the warning whispers of my grandmother, bedtime tales of lost souls resting uneasily. Then a chill skittered down my spine as I heard it, a whisper, soft and insistent. "Help me." The sound curled around me, pulling me closer to the edge of the well, a seduction of despair and longing. My grandmother's warning clashed with the desperate plea. I should leave, I told myself, should run as far away as possible. But something held me there, tethering my soul to the well. I scrambled to my feet, panic driving me to run back towards the house. But a part of me remained, trapped by the promise of answers, of understanding the darkness that clung to this place. The whispers grew louder, echoing in the recesses of my mind, mixing with memories of my grandmother's stories, of family secrets blending with spectral horrors. I could almost hear her voice amongst the murmurs, cursing the day they had moved here, a life once filled with laughter interwoven with unseen terror. Breathless, I fumbled for my phone, the small screen glaring in the dim light as I searched for answers, desperate to understand what I'd seen. It was then that I read about the history of the land, tales of tragedy, of lives lost to the very well that now loomed before me. My heart sank as I realized that long before my grandmother had laid her roots here, others had faced the same fate, children's laughter replaced by anguished cries, families torn apart by inexplicable loss. Those who had lingered here were not at rest. They were trapped, lost, as their stories became entwined with the shadows that clung to the well. Horror settled into my bones like a cold blade, and with each beating pulse in my ears, I understood the truth of my grandmother's words. I was drawn to this place not for answers, but as a vessel for the darkness that had seeped into my family's history. Face pale, palms clammy, I turned from the well, a shroud of dread enveloping me. I couldn't save them, nor could I understand the depths of their anguish, but I knew pretending it didn't exist would only unravel me further. I rushed back to the house, the familiar walls now feeling like a prison rather than a sanctuary. As I locked the door behind me, I finally understood. Some stories were meant to stay buried, their echoes haunting the places they called home, a reminder of the horrors beneath the surface that should never be unearthed. The night stretched like a shadow across the small town of Eldridge. Few dared to venture out after dark. Rumors of an old house at the edge of the woods kept most at bay. They whispered of an ancient horror, a presence that lingered long after the last occupant had vanished years ago. I grew up listening to those tales, never believing, always dismissing them as mere folklore. But curiosity has a way of leading you to dark places, and it started with a dare among friends. One chilly autumn evening, emboldened by youthful bravado, we decided to explore the infamous Grimwald house. Stories of flickering lights, disembodied whispers, and glimpses of shadowy figures haunted its reputation. Armed with flashlights and bravado, we crossed the threshold into the decaying structure, the wooden door creaking ominously behind us. The air was thick with dust and dampness, and a sense of dread enveloped us like a heavy fog. As we stepped inside, laughter echoed through the empty halls, though soon it faded into an uneasy silence. The wooden floors groaned under our weight as we ventured deeper into the heart of the house. Paint peeled away from the walls like memories forgotten, and the air grew colder with each step we took. It wasn't long before the first unsettling feeling washed over me, like an unseen gaze trailing behind. I shrugged it off, attributing it to my imagination. We reached the living room, where a tattered couch sat, facing a long-abandoned fireplace. The walls were adorned with faded photographs of people who once lived there, their faces gaunt and hollow. I couldn't shake the strange sensation that the eyes in those pictures were watching us. My friends were busy exploring, laughing as they prodded at old furniture and cracked mirrors. I felt a pull toward the staircase, a feeling stronger than any fear gripping me. I ignored the protests of my friends, who warned me to stay close, and descended the stairs. The second floor was eerily quiet. The air here was different, heavier, as if it held secrets too dark to be spoken. I wandered into a room at the end of the hall. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing a dimly lit space adorned with a single dusty mirror. As I stepped closer, the reflection seemed almost alive, rippling in ways that defied logic. With an inexplicable urge, I reached out to touch the surface. Suddenly, a sharp chill pierced the air, and a whisper brushed against my ear like a lover's sigh, sending icicles racing down my spine. "Get out, before it's too late." The voice, soft yet commanding, pulled me back, and I stumbled away from the mirror, nearly falling. I glanced around, panic bubbling within me as the sense of being watched intensified. I bolted from the room, racing down the hall as my heart pounded wildly in my chest. My friends waited by the staircase, their faces etched with concern. "What happened?" one of them asked, a hint of dread in her voice. I could only shake my head, speechless, the chilling whisper echoing in my mind. We decided it was time to leave, but as we turned to retrace our steps, an oppressive silence engulfed us, thickening the air. The front door appeared further away than it had when we entered, and the once familiar hallway now felt labyrinthine. Shadows flickered, darting from corner to corner, taunting us as we made our way toward the exit. That's when we noticed it, a figure standing at the far end of the hall, half hidden in the darkness. It was tall and impossibly thin, its outline indistinct, yet it emanated an undeniable malevolence. Our feet felt glued to the floor, and a wave of paralyzing fear washed over us. The figure raised an arm, pointing directly at me, and in that instant, I felt as if the very essence of despair wrapped around my throat, choking the breath from my lungs. My friend screamed, prompting a momentary return of mobility as we bolted toward the entrance. The shadows shifted and closed in around us, as if the house itself was alive, desperate to keep us within its clutches. We stumbled through the door just as it slammed shut behind us with a finality that echoed in my bones. Outside, we fell onto the grass, gasping for air, our minds reeling from the encounter. The night was still, the distant hoot of an owl the only sound breaking the suffocating silence. We ran all the way home, the weight of that moment pressing heavily on my conscience. The experience haunted me for weeks, the whispers and shadows invading my dreams, reminding me of the darkness that lurked within those walls. As time passed, the story moved from the forefront of my mind, buried under the layers of daily life. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within me, a lingering dread that peeked over my shoulder in the darkness. Then one sleepless night, as the clock struck 3, I found myself pulled from my bed, compelled to return to Grimwald House. The hairs on my neck stood on end as I approached, a force stronger than fear driving my every step. Once inside, the air thickened with the palpable presence of something ancient and powerful. The whispers called to me again, inviting and alluring. I made my way back to the room with the mirror, compelled to understand what lay beyond its surface. As I stood before it, the reflection was not my own, but a swirling abyss, deep and hungry. I stepped closer, entranced, and as my fingertips grazed the cool surface, my reflection fractured, revealing twisted faces, each one screaming in terror. The realization hit me like a cold wave. This was their fate, trapped forever in this prison of despair. Panic surged through my veins, but it was too late. The mirror consumed me, pulling me into its depths, as the whispers rose to a triumphant crescendo. I was lost forever, my soul entwined with the horrors of Grimwald House, destined to join the chorus of despair, whispering warnings to the next fool who dared to enter, to get out before it was too late. It started on a rainy evening, the kind that lingers and wraps around you like a damp blanket. I had just moved into a century-old house inherited from my grandmother, a place steeped in memories and shadows. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and polished wood, its silence occasionally punctuated by the creaking of floorboards that seemed to sigh under the weight of unseen burdens. I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, the remnants of childhood fears bubbling to the surface, but I was wrong. As days passed, I began noticing subtle anomalies. At night, I would hear whispers, low and mournful, as if the walls themselves were trying to communicate. I told myself it was the house settling, the wind howling through the eaves, but deep down, I felt a knot of unease forming in my stomach. Occasionally, I'd catch a glimpse of something fleeting out of the corner of my eye, a shadow darting just beyond the periphery of my vision. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. I brushed it off as fatigue, the product of sleepless nights spent unpacking and organizing. Then, one night, as the clock struck 3, I was jolted awake by the sound of soft, melodic laughter echoing through the hallway. At first, I thought it was a dream, a remnant of a late-night movie, but the laughter grew louder, more insistent. My heart pounded in my chest as I gathered enough courage to rise from my bed, pulling on a sweater to ward off the chill in the air. The hallway seemed to stretch before me, shadows pooling in the corners like dark secrets waiting to be uncovered. As I crept closer, the laughter faded, replaced by a faint sobbing that tugged at my heartstrings. It was a sound so broken and desperate that I felt compelled to follow it, drawn into the depths of my own curiosity. I descended the staircase, each step creaking softly beneath my weight, the atmosphere growing heavier with each passing moment. The sobbing led me to the cellar door, a place I had instinctively avoided since I arrived, its oppressive darkness promising things best left unexplored. Taking a deep breath, I forced the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The musty air enveloped me as I descended the stairs, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the darkness. The sobbing ceased abruptly, replaced by a bone-chilling silence that made my skin crawl. I scanned the room, cluttered with forgotten memories, old furniture draped in dust, boxes filled with moth-eaten clothes, and cobwebs hanging like veils from the ceiling. In the corner, partially hidden beneath a tattered blanket, I spotted something moving. My heart raced as I approached, wanting desperately to flee, but feeling an inexplicable pull towards whatever lay beneath the fabric. With trembling hands, I pulled the blanket away, revealing an old, weathered doll with a cracked porcelain face and glassy eyes that seemed to follow me. It was undeniably eerie, but as I looked closer, I saw an inscription on its chest, a name, Emily. The moment I whispered the name, a gust of cold air rushed past me, snuffing out my flashlight. Panic surged through me. I fumbled to turn it back on, the beam flickering to life just in time to see a small figure dart past the doorway. My breath hitched, barely visible, a little girl in a tattered dress, her hair tangled and wild, her face obscured by shadows. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground as she turned back to look at me, her expression one of profound sorrow. "Help me," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread woven with despair. "I can't find my mommy." I stumbled back, the air thick with the weight of her plea. I didn't know what to do, didn't even understand what this meant. The house was old, it had likely seen many children. Maybe Emily was just a figment of my imagination, ghostly echoes from a forgotten past. And yet, as I stood there, frozen, I felt a genuine urge to reach out to her. "Where is she?" I found myself asking, rhythmically, instinctively. But no answer came. The girl merely faded into the dark, leaving behind an unsettling silence. From that moment, my dreams were invaded by visions of Emily, the whispering laughter, the tears, the emptiness of her gaze. I learned that she was a girl who had lived in the house decades before, vanishing on a stormy night just like the one in which I moved in. According to local legends, she had been searching for her mother, lost to time and circumstance. The townsfolk were hesitant to discuss her. Some claimed they still saw her wandering the streets, while others swore she had cursed the house itself. Determined to help her move on, I began researching everything I could about her disappearance. Days turned into weeks, and I became obsessed, poring over old newspapers and seeking out elderly residents who might remember. I collected fragments of her story, a tragedy steeped in loss, with a mother whose despair echoed through time. I soon realized that to lift Emily's spirit, I needed to find closure for her, in this world or the next. As I gathered courage, I decided to hold a small memorial in the cellar, placing the doll underneath a flickering candle. I spoke to her softly, recounting the stories I had learned, hoping this would give her the solace she desperately needed. That night, as I sat in the candlelight, I felt a gentle warmth envelop me, the shadows around the room quaking as if responding to my plea. In the days that followed, the house began to change. The oppressive feeling lifted, and the whispers that had once haunted me transformed into a soft, soothing presence. I realized Emily was watching over me, her sorrow easing into a protective warmth. And in that moment, I understood, in helping her find peace, I had unknowingly found a home. The history of the house became a part of me, intertwining our fates as if we were forever bound by the threads of love and loss. Though the past would always linger, it no longer felt like a burden, but rather a bittersweet melody composed of memories, shadows, and the resilience to move forward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows through the trees, I found myself walking down an unkempt path in the woods behind my childhood home. It had been years since I had set foot in this place, a place once filled with laughter and warmth, now transformed into a haunting echo of the past. I was drawn back, a magnetic pull to the area where my friends and I used to play, oblivious to the stories woven into the fabric of those woods. My mother had often told me tales of the mysterious happenings, the whispers in the breeze, the shadowy figures that danced at the edge of our vision, the old cabin that stood hidden among the trees. I brushed them off as mere folklore, fabrications of a child's imagination, but as I retraced my steps, a shiver crawled up my spine, refusing to let go. The woods had their own pulse, a rhythm that seemed to quicken as I ventured deeper. Each step echoed in the stillness of the evening, amplifying a growing sense of dread. The trees, gnarled and twisted by time, held secrets that felt impossibly heavy, pressing down on me with every breath I took. I hesitated, the branches arching above like skeletal hands reaching out, almost beckoning me forward. Just then, I heard it, a low, guttural sound that rippled through the air, slicing through the silence like a knife. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. It felt as though the forest was alive, watching my every move. I remembered the stories, children lost to the woods, whispers that lured them deeper until they never returned. I turned to leave, but a sudden rustle stopped me in my tracks. A figure emerged from the darkness, cloaked in shadow and malice, too indistinct to grasp, yet undeniably present. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground, paralyzed by fear. The figure didn't approach. Instead, it stood, watching me with an intensity that chilled my blood. I could see nothing of its face, just the sensation of being scrutinized. I thought of my childhood friends, the last memories of laughter morphing into a surreal nightmare under that gaze. The whispers began again, soft at first, almost melodic, weaving through the trees like a siren's call. "Stay just a little longer," they urged, and I felt an unnatural pull to comply. Clutching the pendant my mother had given me for protection, I felt its weight against my chest, grounding me in reality. I took a step back, then another, breaking the spell that bound me. The figure seemed to waver, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. I turned and ran, branches ripping at my clothes, thorns tearing at my skin as I raced back down the path. The whispers grew frantic, a cacophony of voices screaming my name, pleading with me to return. Panic surged, fueling my speed, and as I burst into the clearing, the woods seemed to exhale, the predatory tension dissipating with my escape. I stumbled back to my home, panting and terrified, heart racing as I slammed the door shut behind me. I locked it and leaned against it, feeling safe again. Yet, the whispers still echoed in my mind. I knew I couldn't tell anyone what happened. They wouldn't believe me. They would dismiss it as childish fancy, even as I felt the darkness clinging to me, the shadows dancing just beyond the light of my porch. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to shake off the experience, telling myself it was just a figment of my imagination, a trick played by time and nostalgia. But every night, as I lay in bed, I could hear the whispers, soft yet insistent, beckoning me back to the woods. I began to see glimpses of the figure in the periphery of my vision, always lingering just out of sight, always watching. I found myself drawn back again, every fiber of my being telling me to stay away, yet the urge to confront my fears was overpowering. So, I returned once more, anxiety knotting my stomach. As I stepped onto the familiar path, the atmosphere felt charged, a crackling energy that made the hairs stand on the back of my neck. The sun had set early, casting a murky gloom over the woods. I tried to steel myself against the fear that enveloped me, but as I walked further in, the whispers rose, wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. "Come and play," they sang, a chorus of voices that clawed at my sanity. Panic surged, but I pressed on, driven by an inexplicable need to confront whatever haunted these woods. I stumbled upon the cabin, the dilapidated structure resembling the embodiment of my nightmares. Its door creaked open, seemingly inviting me inside. With a deep breath, I crossed the threshold. The stench of decay hit me like a wall, the air thick and oppressive. Shadows danced around me, whispering secrets that only heightened my dread. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the far corner, and I whirled around, heart racing. And then I saw it. The figure was there, closer than before, its features still indistinct but carrying an unmistakable weight of sorrow. "You shouldn't have returned," it whispered, the sound reverberating through my bones. I staggered backward, terror crashing over me like a wave. In that moment, I understood the truth. The stories were not mere tales. They were warnings, and I had ignored them. I turned to flee, the primal instinct of survival kicking in, but the door slammed shut, sealing my fate within those haunted walls. The whispering grew louder, a cacophony of lost souls sharing their anguish and rage, a chorus of despair echoing as I realized I was now part of their story, trapped in this never-ending nightmare. As darkness consumed me, I understood some woods are better left unexplored, some stories better left untold. I had ventured too far, and now the shadows were my only company, the whispers my eternal lullaby. I remember the night it all started like it was yesterday. I was alone in my creaky old house on the outskirts of town, the oppressive silence wrapping around me like a thick shroud. It was autumn, and the wind howled outside, rattling the windows as leaves scraped against the walls, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. I had settled down in my dimly lit living room, a flickering candle casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. My friends had warned me about the place. They said it had a history, that the shadows weren't just tricks of the light, and that I should leave while I still could. But I brushed it off, convinced that the tales were mere figments of overactive imaginations, folklore woven into the fabric of our small town's history. That evening, I had found an old journal in the attic while searching for something to read. Its leather cover was cracked and worn, and as I flipped through the pages, yellowed with age, I became engrossed in the strange accounts of a woman who had lived in my house decades ago. Each entry sent shivers down my spine. She spoke of whispering voices that called her name, of shadows that moved independently of their owners, of nights so dark they felt alive, watching and waiting. I scoffed at her accounts, attributing them to superstition and loneliness. But as the hours passed and the house settled into the deep stillness of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to fend off the chill that seemed to seep into my bones. I could hear the wind moaning outside, but lurking underneath it was another sound, a soft whisper that called my name. I dismissed it at first, thinking it was just the draft echoing against the walls, but it grew louder, more distinct, sending prickles of fear crawling up my spine. My heart raced, and I called out, thinking maybe it was a neighbor or the wind playing tricks. My voice echoed back, hollow and distant. Swallowed by the blackness of the room. As I tried to rationalize the sensation, the lights began to flicker, plunging the room into a surreal dance of light and shadow. It felt like the very essence of the house was alive, breathing, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on me. I looked at the journal again, compelled to read more. One entry in particular caught my eye. She had described a feeling of growing despair, a realization that she was not alone, that something in the darkness craved her. Suddenly, I felt a rush of cold air against my face, but my windows were tightly shut. My breath quickened, the anxiety flooding my veins as I realized I had neglected the creaking floors, the whispers, all the signs that something was wrong. The atmosphere thickened, and I felt dizzy, disoriented. I set the journal down and decided to get some water, anything to ground myself. As I walked into the kitchen, the whispers transformed, swirling around my head like an unseen storm, chanting my name in mournful tones. Panic tightened my chest, and I stumbled back, only to collide with something solid behind me. I turned sharply, heart hammering, the kitchen now completely enveloped in shadows. Nothing was there, just the flickering candlelight playing tricks on my mind. Compelled by an unseen force, I returned to the living room. The candle's flame had turned blue, an omen I vaguely remembered from the journal's pages. It was significant, a sign of malice. The shadows now loomed larger as they twisted and morphed, taking grotesque forms that seemed to reach for me with claw-like hands. I slammed the journal shut, the noise like a gunshot in the silence, but the whispers crescendoed, drowning out every rational thought. I felt cornered, the walls breathing, pulsing, and with every breath, I felt the weight of the house settle upon my chest. Desperately, I bolted for the front door, but it wouldn't budge. I pulled and tugged, the cold metal handle searing against my palm. It was as if the house itself had become sentient, intent on holding me prisoner. In a fit of terror, I turned back toward the living room, frantically searching for a way out. The flickering light revealed fleeting glimpses of faces within the shadows, expressions twisted in anguish, mouths opened wide in silent screams. Frozen in place, I realized the horror of it all. These were souls trapped, tormented by whatever darkness dwelled in the house. With a final surge of will, I hurled myself against the door one last time and stumbled outside, breathless and trembling. The night air bit into my skin, revitalizing my senses, but the horror of what I had just experienced clung to me like a shadow. I stood on the porch, trying to make sense of it all, as the house loomed behind me, dark and forbidding, its very presence a tangible threat. It became clear as the wind howled, a warning that I wasn't supposed to be here, that some doors are meant to remain closed, and that the night holds many terrors waiting to capture the unwary. I ran, not stopping until the town lights came into view. But even now, I can still hear the whispers, calling me back to the shadows that so desperately want to embrace me again. The air was thick with silence as I sat on the porch of my childhood home, the fading sun casting elongated shadows across the yard. It was the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're being watched, and perhaps I was. After years away, returning felt both familiar and alien, like a dream you can't quite grasp. Time had a way of reshaping memories, twisting them into something unrecognizable. I hadn't been back since that summer. The summer I finally learned the truth about my family. And about myself. IT started when my grandmother fell ill, and my parents decided it was time for me to spend the summer in the small, decrepit house where she had lived for decades, nestled deep in the woods. The moment we arrived, I felt it, a heaviness that clung to every corner as if the walls themselves whispered secrets. I remember my grandmother lying in her bed, frail and sunken, her eyes darting toward the window as if waiting for something or someone. I would sit by her bedside for hours, hearing her rasping voice recount the tales of our ancestors, of spirits and curses that enveloped our family like a shroud. One evening, I wandered into the attic, drawn by an invisible force. Dust hung in the air, illuminated by the slanted beams of the setting sun. Among the boxes of forgotten trinkets, I found an old, leather-bound journal that belonged to my mother. The pages were yellowed and fragile, filled with her childhood scrawls detailing strange sounds in the night and shadows that danced just beyond the edges of light. I flipped through it, mesmerized until I noticed a scribbled entry that made my blood run cold. There it was, a mention of a figure that haunted our family. A tall, faceless silhouette that emerged only when the moon was full, ominously standing at the edge of the woods, watching, waiting. Curiosity consumed me, and as the night descended, I found myself at the edge of those very woods, the moon full and bright above. The trees loomed like dark sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. I hesitated, but something compelled me to step deeper into the shadows. As I walked, the air grew colder, wrapping around me like a shroud. The stillness felt alive, and a creeping sensation crawled up my spine. Then, I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the clearing, its form indistinct, as if it was woven from the night itself. Terror gripped me, and I turned to flee, but my feet felt rooted to the ground, an unseen force constricting around my legs. Suddenly, a rush of wind howled through the trees, and the figure began to move towards me, the silence broken only by the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. I finally broke free from the paralysis and sprinted back to the house, slamming the door behind me. My grandmother was sitting up in bed, eyes wide with a knowing fear. "You saw it, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, too frightened to speak. She began to tell me the stories that she had always danced around, tales of our lineage cursed by the choices of a distant ancestor who had angered something ancient and vengeful. The nights passed in fitful sleep, each whisper of the wind outside sending shivers down my spine. I began to notice changes in the house, objects that would move position, strange sounds like footsteps echoing down the hall, and the overwhelming feeling of being watched. My dreams grew darker, filled with shadow and whispers, revealing glimpses of the figure that haunted my waking moments. I awoke one night to find my grandmother standing at the foot of my bed, staring blankly at the wall. I called out to her, but she didn't respond, her gaze fixed, as if she were seeing something beyond the realm of the living. By the end of the summer, my grandmother's condition worsened, and one stormy night, she passed away, the house falling silent with her last breath. In the days that followed, as we prepared for her funeral, I felt a sense of weightlessness, as if the oppressive atmosphere lifted. But late one evening, alone in the attic, I stumbled upon the journal once more. This time, my mother's entries were not the only ones I found. The previous owner of the journal had written warnings, pleading for the family to leave, to break the cycle before it claimed another victim. In that moment, I understood. The figure wasn't just a specter from my family's past. It was a manifestation of our fear and sorrow, born from generations of unspoken pain. The night of my grandmother's funeral, I gathered the courage to confront the figure once more, standing at the edge of the woods, the moon casting an eerie glow. This time, I didn't run. I stood my ground, demanding to know what it wanted. And in that moment, the fog of confusion cleared. I realized the truth. It wasn't just a haunting, but a reflection of myself, a symbol of the secrets that had been buried with my family and the burden I had inherited. With dawn breaking, I heard the whispers fading, the weight of the history lifting as the figure melted into the mist. When I returned to the house, I found it transformed as if a veil had been lifted. I packed my things and left, vowing never to return to that haunted place, finally free from its grip. But even now, as I sit on the porch of my new home, that summer lingers in my mind, a reminder of the darkness that can cling to a family and the strength it takes to confront it. The figure may no longer haunt my dreams, but its lesson remains. Sometimes, to find peace, you must confront the shadows of your past and break the cycle of fear that binds you. That night, the air inside the old house felt heavier than usual, thick with the scent of mildew and something I couldn't quite place. I had inherited the creaky, dilapidated structure from my grandmother, who had lived alone in it for decades and, as family lore suggested, had been the subject of whispers in the small town. They claimed she dabbled in the occult, though I never saw any signs of it. The house was filled with her old furniture, strange trinkets, and photographs of family members long gone, their faces faded and haunting in the dim light. After a long day of clearing out years of accumulated dust, I settled down in the living room, the only area that had felt somewhat inviting. The wooden floor creaked under my weight as I placed my tired body on the moth-eaten sofa, and I began flipping through the pages of an old photo album I had found. The pictures showed my grandmother with friends, some of whom wore curious expressions, as though a secret hovered just beyond the edge of the frame. As I turned the pages, a sudden chill swept through the room, causing the hair on the back of my neck to stand on end. Dismissing it as a draft, I continued looking. Then, I came across an unusual photo, a dark image that seemed to ripple in the light. In it, my grandmother stood in the woods behind the house, sporting a stern expression. It was not the smiley grandmother I remembered. Instead, her eyes glinted with something terrible. Strangely, in the corner of the photo, a figure was barely visible, obscured by shadows. Feeling unnerved, I decided to put the album down. I made my way toward the kitchen to grab a drink and clear my mind. The house creaked ominously, as if in protest to my presence. Just as I reached for a glass, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from upstairs, like a finger drumming against wood. I froze, heart pounding, questioning whether I had left the window open or if something else had stirred in the house. I rationalized that it was just the house settling, yet curiosity tugged at me. Ignoring my better judgment, I ascended the staircase slowly, holding my breath. Each step echoed, a reminder of my solitude. The upstairs hallway was shrouded in darkness, illuminated only by the flickering light from the antique chandelier. I approached the first door, which led to my grandmother's old bedroom, and pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with memories. I scanned the room, but found nothing amiss. Then, the tapping resumed, louder now and closer than before. My gaze darted to the end of the hall where the attic door was slightly ajar, a faint light spilling out. The attic. My grandmother had warned me never to go up there when I was a child. With trepidation, I made my way toward the door, forcing it open. The stairs to the attic were steep and narrow, and I hesitated at the bottom, the restlessness in my heart urging me to retreat. But the tapping persisted, calling me closer. I clambered up the stairs and emerged into a dusty, dimly lit space filled with boxes and cobwebs. My eyes adjusted, and I noticed an old rocking chair in the corner, swaying gently, though there was no one there to push it. My stomach dropped. "This is just a draft," I whispered to myself, but deep down, I knew something was not right as I stepped further inside. The air turned cold, and the atmosphere thickened. My eyes caught something shiny beneath a pile of boxes in a corner. I moved closer, heart racing, and pulled the boxes away, revealing an ornate mirror framed in dark wood, intricate carvings etching its surface. It was beautiful yet sinister. It felt as if it were alive, pulling at my thoughts. I reached out and touched the surface. Cold, just as I expected. Suddenly, the tapping stopped. I stared at my reflection, my face pale and strained. But then something shifted behind me, and I turned quickly, catching only the tail end of a shadow slipping away into the furthest corner of the attic. My breath hitched in my throat. "Hello," I called out, a tremor in my voice. There was no answer, just silence. Fueled by a mix of fear and determination, I brandished the mirror like a shield and shouted, "Who's there?" No reply. The air grew heavier, the silence almost palpable. I felt a presence, a dark energy wrapping around me, choking my courage. I took a step back toward the stairs, my instincts screaming at me to flee at that moment. The mirror rippled like water, distorting my reflection and showing a different image, an image of my grandmother, her face twisted with terror, eyes pleading with me to leave. I stumbled back, realizing this was the same haunted figure from the old photograph. Panic surged through me. I spun on my heels and bolted down the stairs, stumbling blindly through the darkened house and out the front door. I didn't stop running until I was safely in my car, the engine revving as I sped away, heart racing as I drove into the night. I glanced into the rearview mirror one last time, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw her, my grandmother's face, a mixture of sorrow and rage, staring back at me from the shadows of that cursed house. It would be years before I returned, years filled with questions about that night, about the secrets that lingered in the corners of the childhood home I had abandoned. I never did find out what had happened in that attic, but I knew one thing. Some stories are better left buried in the past, and some houses should remain unvisited. When I was a child, my family moved into an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. It was a beautiful structure, with ornate woodwork and sprawling gardens, but there was something unsettling about it that my parents chose to ignore. From my very first night in the house, I felt a prickle of unease crawl up my spine as I lay in bed, the creaking sounds of the old home seeming to whisper secrets I was too young to understand. It was during those long nights that I first heard her, the soft sobbing echoing through the dimly lit hallways. At first, I thought it was my imagination, just the house settling or perhaps the wind rattling the windows. Yet, as days turned into weeks, the sound grew more and more distinct, a heart-wrenching wail that seemed to seep into my very bones. Desperate to uncover the source, I would tiptoe out of my room, clutching my flashlight, its beam flickering nervously as the shadows danced around me. I ventured deep into the labyrinth of hallways, following the sound to a closed door at the end of a long corridor. The door was old, its frame splintered and paint peeling, as if it had been forgotten for ages. I hesitated, a chill running through me, but curiosity got the better of my fear. I turned the knob slowly, the door creaking open to reveal a dusty room, filled with old furniture and remnants of lives long past. In the center of the room stood an antique rocking chair, its gentle sway defying the absence of any visible occupant. The sobbing stopped suddenly, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed down on me like an unseen weight. I could feel the air grow colder, and I instinctively took a step back. That's when I saw her, a figure in a tattered white dress, her long hair hanging over her face, blocking her features from view. She stood in the corner, her body trembling as if caught in an eternal battle with grief. I was frozen, paralyzed by a mix of terror and empathy. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper, my voice trembling as much as my legs. The apparition lifted her head slowly, her face hidden beneath a veil of hair. "Help me," she breathed, her voice a ghostly echo that resonated through the air. Fear coursed through me as I stumbled back, heart racing, every instinct screaming for me to run. Yet something in her pain held me captive, tethered to the spot as if invisible chains bound me. With a burst of courage, I took a step forward. "What happened to you?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the thundering of my heart. She raised a hand, pointing toward the window, where the moon's light poured in, illuminating the dust particles swirling in the air. "I am trapped," she whispered, "but you must know the truth." A wave of sorrow washed over her, and in that moment, I felt a connection, a sense of understanding. She began to speak, each word heavy with the weight of unlived life, recounting a story of love turned bitter, of betrayal that had bound her spirit to this place. She was once a mother, she revealed, her child taken from her in a cruel twist of fate, an accident that had stolen her joy and left only despair. The anguish in her voice made my heart ache, and I realized that she was yearning for closure, for someone to remember her, to acknowledge her pain. "You must tell my story," she urged, her eyes now glistening with unshed tears, "so that I may finally be free." I took a deep breath, nodding, overwhelmed by the gravity of what she asked. I promised her I would, that I wouldn't let her story fade into nothingness. No longer just a distant echo, but a plea for acknowledgement. As I turned to leave, feeling the oppressive weight of sorrow lift slightly, I looked back, but she had vanished, the rocking chair still. The sobbing ceased, leaving an eerie quiet behind. I returned to my room, shivering from the cold that lingered in the air, and the promise I had made echoed in my mind. Days turned into weeks, and I longed to fulfill that promise. After school, I would research tragedies that befell families in the area, poring over the town archives and library books, piecing together snippets of a life that was never mine but felt embedded in my soul. The more I learned, the clearer her story became, a tragic tale of loss, of a mother who roamed those very halls, searching for her child, seeking solace amidst her anguish. Every revelation brought another long-lost fragment of her life back to me, and I began to write, pouring her story onto the pages with urgency. Then came the night when I finally finished. I stood in that room again, the weight of the words I had written clutched tightly in my hands. "I know your story," I whispered into the empty space, tears streaming down my cheeks as I felt a warm breeze sweep past me, as if an acknowledgement. "You will not be forgotten." That night, as I drifted to sleep, I felt a sense of peace blanket the house, a calm I had never experienced before. In the weeks that followed, the sobbing stopped completely, replaced by an overwhelming feeling of warmth and lightness that filled the once dark corners of the home. I had shared her truth with my family, with friends, and even with the townsfolk, ensuring her story would be honored, never to fade away. One morning, as I awoke to the sunlight streaming through my window, I glanced toward the old rocking chair, and to my surprise, I saw a small bouquet of wildflowers resting on the seat, a simple gift from a spirit finally at rest. And from that day onward, the house felt different, a sanctuary of memories rather than a prison of sorrow, proof that acknowledgement could heal even the deepest wounds, both seen and unseen. It began in a small town, the kind where everyone knows each other, and secrets are scarce. I was just a teenager at the time, restless and eager for something beyond the mundane routine of school and chores. My friends and I often whispered about the old Anderson house at the edge of town. It was said to be haunted, a place where strange happenings were a part of its fabric, woven through generations. One late autumn evening, driven by nothing more than teenage bravado and the need to prove ourselves, we decided to explore it. The sun sank low, painting the sky in hues of crimson and violet, as shadows stretched across the abandoned property. The air was thick with an unsettling quiet, broken only by the rustling leaves and our nervous laughter. The rickety front door creaked ominously as we stepped inside, a gust of stale air greeting us. The once grand foyer was draped in layers of dust, the remnants of a life long abandoned. We ventured deeper, our flashlights flickering against the peeling wallpaper, revealing glimpses of a forgotten past. Whispers danced through the air, echoes of laughter and sorrow that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. It wasn't long before we found ourselves in what used to be the living room. A grand piano stood shrouded in darkness, its keys yellowed with age. Against our better judgment, one of my friends pressed a key, and a haunting note filled the air, reverberating through the stillness. Suddenly, a chill swept through the room, and we felt an oppressive weight, as though the house was inhaling our fear. Laughing nervously, we jokingly dared each other to explore the upper levels. As we climbed the staircase, the wood groaned beneath our feet, a warning we ignored. The hallway above was dimly lit, our flashlights revealing faded photographs hanging askew, faces frozen in time, eyes that seemed to follow us, judging. The atmosphere shifted, turning heavy and thick, as we approached a door at the end of the corridor, slightly ajar. Driven by curiosity, I pushed it open, revealing a child's bedroom. The bed was neatly made, a stark contrast to the decay surrounding it. A doll sat in the corner, its glassy eyes glinting malevolently in the dark. I felt a chill run down my spine as the air turned cold, the laughter of my friends echoing in my mind, distant and fading. Suddenly, the doors slammed shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged as I banged on the door, but my friends' voices were muffled and distant. I could hear them laughing, probably thinking I was pulling a prank. As I shouted for them, my heart raced, a primal fear gripping me. The darkness enveloped me, thick and suffocating, and I felt an unseen presence lurking just beyond my field of vision. Then I heard it, a soft whisper, like a breeze, brushing against my ear. "Help me." It was a child's voice, fragile and desperate. My heart dropped. I stumbled backward, realizing I wasn't alone. I could feel the air shift, the temperature dropping, and in that moment, I knew I had to escape. I searched for the doorknob, panic clawing at my throat when it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, urging, pleading, surrounding me, drowning out my cries for help. I banged against the door harder, fear knotting tighter until it felt like it could split me apart. Then, in a final desperate move, I threw my weight against the door, and it gave way, spilling me into the hallway. I gasped for air, but my friends were nowhere to be seen. The house felt alive, shifting around me. I hurried down the stairs, the dread creeping in like a poisonous fog. I could hear faint laughter echoing, mocking, but it faded as I descended, replaced by the sound of something else, a low, guttural growl. I sprinted for the front door, flinging it open and tumbling into the yard, the chill of night air lacerating my skin. My friends were waiting outside, confusion etched on their faces. They insisted they had been right there, laughing, and had no idea what I was talking about. The relief of being outside subsided quickly, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. I could feel the weight of the house behind me, shadows flickering in the windows. We left in silence, an unspoken agreement that we wouldn't return. But the experience lingered, a dark cloud over our friendship, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me home. Nights turned into weeks, and sleep became elusive as the whispers invaded my thoughts, creeping in when I was most vulnerable. I began to hear the child's voice in the silence, a soft plea that echoed in my mind. "Help me." I confided in my friends, but they brushed it off, attributing it to stress or imagination. But I knew better. The presence grew stronger, shadows flitting through my peripheral vision, whispers becoming clearer, desperate calls that left me in cold sweats. I tried to ignore it, to push it away, but it clung to me like a shadow. I began to see things, a fleeting figure at the corner of my eye, a reflection that wasn't my own in the mirror. Panic took hold as I realized that the house had not let go. It cradled a piece of me, intertwining our fates as the whispers grew louder, demanding attention, pleading for salvation. One night, unable to bear it anymore, I returned to the house, convinced that facing my fears was the only way to free myself. The moon hung high, casting an eerie glow as I stepped through the threshold. The air was thick with anticipation. I called out, confronting the whispers that spiraled around me, echoing my own fear. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The silence that followed was deafening, and then, like a switch flipping, the house responded. The walls seemed to breathe around me, shadows swirling and coalescing into a figure, a little girl, her eyes wide and sorrowful. "Help me," she said, her voice echoing through the desolate rooms. I felt the weight of her despair, the burden of her past pressing down on me. I realized she wasn't a threat. She was lost. In that moment, I understood that I had to help her find peace. "What happened to you?" I asked, my heart racing. Tears flowed down her ghostly cheeks, and she pointed to the corner of the room where a small box lay hidden beneath a floorboard. With trembling hands, I pried it open, revealing forgotten memories, a locket, a note, remnants of a childhood interrupted by fear and tragedy. The moment I held it, a wave of energy surged between us, and the house trembled, vibrating with emotion. A light enveloped the girl, and I could see gratitude shining in her eyes. As she faded away, the oppressive weight lifted from the house, the whispers silenced. I stumbled back, breathless, realizing I had broken the curse that held her captive. I left the house for the last time, knowing that I had faced true horror, not in the form of specters, but in understanding the pain tied to this world and the next. As I walked away, I felt a sense of peace wash over me for the first time in months, but I would always remember the girl whose voice had haunted me, a reminder that sometimes horror isn't just in what lurks in the shadows, but in the stories of those who have been forgotten. It was a damp, foggy evening when I found myself drawn to the old, decrepit house at the end of the lane. I had driven past it countless times, always feeling an unshakable sense of foreboding. Rumors swirled in the small town. A family had once lived there, cursed by tragedy, their laughter long since silenced. Curiosity tugged at my conscience, urging me to step closer to the shadows where untold stories lingered. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air changed. It thickened, filled with a mix of stale dust and something that felt almost alive, like the remnants of sorrow that permeated the walls. Each creak of the ancient floorboards echoed like a warning as I made my way deeper into the heart of the house, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, an unsettling chill creeping up my spine. As I wandered from room to room, I stumbled upon remnants of a life once lived, a child's broken toy, a faded photograph of a family smiling as if they had known only joy. The more I explored, the heavier the atmosphere grew, a palpable weight pressing down on me. In what seemed like a living room, a battered armchair faced a fireplace filled with ashes long cooled. Something compelled me to sit, and as I did, a cold breeze swept through the room, sending shivers racing across my skin. I could swear I heard whispers hidden within the rustling of the leaves outside, fragmented snippets that sent my heart racing. "Get out," the voice seemed to plead, barely audible yet unmistakably urgent. Dismissing the whispers as figments of my imagination, I stood up and moved toward the staircase leading to the attic. Each step felt like an affront to some unseen presence, yet an irresistible urge propelled me upward. When I reached the attic door, it swung open with a force of its own. Dust motes danced in the air like tiny spirits as I stepped inside, revealing a realm frozen in time. Old trunks lay scattered, their contents spilling out. Clothes that once adorned figures long gone, letters yellowed with age, and a small, ornate mirror covered in a thick layer of grime. Curiosity piqued, I approached the mirror, wiping the surface gently with my sleeve. My reflection stared back, yet something was amiss. Behind me, the hazy outline of a woman flickered into view, her eyes hollowed and pleading, mouth moving as if she were trying to speak. Heart pounding, I turned to face her, but she vanished like smoke, leaving only the echo of despair in her wake. Panic surged through me, urging me to flee, but before I could retreat, the whispers returned, now louder, merging into a cacophony of sorrowful cries. "Help us," they implored, wrapped in a desperate yearning that chilled my bones. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, yet I was rooted to the spot by a force I couldn't comprehend. Fragments of stories intertwined with my surroundings, each more tragic than the last, lives interrupted, dreams shattered, souls trapped in a loop of anguish. With every agonizing moment, the atmosphere thickened, the air electric with grief and longing. I staggered back, nearly tripping over an old trunk, and in that noisy stumble, something tumbled out, a diary, worn and fragile, its pages crumbling at the edges. I hesitated only for a moment before greedily snatching it up, my heart racing at the possibility that it could hold the key to this eerie tragedy. As I opened the diary, a rush of emotions flooded over me, fear, longing, and an overwhelming sense of loss. The words jumped off the pages, describing a family torn apart by betrayal and despair, their lives spiraling into darkness after a fire consumed their dreams. I read on, each entry more heart-wrenching than the last, until I reached the final entry, written in a shaky hand. "We cannot leave this place. We are bound by the pain we caused and the spirits we harmed. If you find this, know that we cannot rest until our story is finally told." The air crackled around me as I finished reading, the whispers intensifying into a haunting chorus echoing through the attic. Reality hit me like a physical blow. I needed to leave, but the door slammed shut with an echoing bang that made my heart race even faster. I was not alone. Shadows crept around the edges of my vision, blurring the lines between the past and present. Desperate to escape, I pounded on the door, adrenaline coursing through me. The whispers morphed into cries of anguish, urging me to stay, to listen, to understand. But I couldn't bear it. I had to get out. Summoning every ounce of strength, I shoved against the door, and it flew open, spilling me into the hallway that felt like a refuge. I didn't look back as I raced down the stairs, past the ghostly remnants of lost lives. Bursting through the front door, I gasped as the cool night air hit my flushed face. Behind me, I could swear I heard the soft sobs of the lost souls resonating in the wind, a reminder of their unfinished business. I stumbled to my car, heart pounding wildly, the weight of their stories still pressing upon my chest. As I drove away, the house receded into the fog, but the memories, the haunting whispers, clung to my mind. A reminder that some places are never truly abandoned, and some stories are eternally bound to their tellers. It had been a long, grueling day at work, and I was eager to return home, seeking solace in the comfort of my small apartment. As I entered, the familiar creaks of the floorboards greeted me, and a sense of relief swept over me. Little did I know that the evening would lead me down a path I never expected to explore. I settled onto my worn couch, surrounded by dim light and the soft hum of my old radiator. But instead of the usual silence, I was unnerved by a slight rustling from the kitchen, a noise that seemed out of place in the stillness of the night. Venturing toward the sound, I noticed the light was flickering ominously, casting odd shadows against the walls. Curiosity mingled with an inexplicable sense of dread as I approached, peering into the kitchen. At first, I saw nothing amiss, just the usual clutter. Dishes piled high in the sink and remnants of my last meal scattered across the counter. Yet, as I turned to leave, the door swung shut behind me, the sudden bang echoing in the small space, sending a jolt through my nerves. Heart racing, I swung around, my breath catching in my throat when I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a figure standing just beyond my periphery. I turned fully, my pulse pounding, but the room was empty, just shadows dancing on the walls. I forced myself to breathe, reminding myself that fatigue could play tricks on my mind. Shaking off the feeling, I retreated to the living room, forcing myself to focus on the TV. But the show felt hollow, the characters' laughter pricking at my anxiety rather than easing it. Just as I began to settle in, the hair on the back of my neck prickled. I wasn't alone. The feeling was unmistakable, a thick, oppressive presence weighing on the air around me. I turned to glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, but nothing met my gaze. This was getting ridiculous. I poured myself a glass of water, willing the atmosphere to lighten, but as I took a sip, the chills skittered down my spine. I felt it again, a shadow flitting just outside the edge of my vision. A deep primal fear took hold of me, compelling me to get up, to check the locks on my door, to make sure no one had entered my sanctuary. As I moved to the front door, the unease thickened, pooling in my stomach. I double-checked the deadbolts, glancing through the peephole to find nothing but darkness beyond my threshold. Frustrated, I leaned back against the door, taking a breath to steady my nerves when a loud thump echoed from the hallway. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, straining to listen. It was followed by a slow, deliberate scratching, as if something was being dragged against the floor. Something inside urged me to hide, to get away from whatever was out there, but I couldn't let fear dictate my actions. I crept toward the sound, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Each step felt weighed down by an unseen force, muffled by the tension in the air. As I reached the end of the hallway, there it was, a faint light shimmering from the bathroom. The door stood ajar, swinging slightly as if beckoning me closer. Swallowing hard, I pushed it open, the creak of the hinges amplifying the dread clawing at my insides. The bathroom was empty, looming shadows pooling in the corners, and the light flickering like a dying star. With a deep breath, I stepped inside, but the moment I did, the door slammed shut behind me, locking me in. Panic surged, and I rattled the handle, but it refused to budge. I pressed my back against the cold tiles, feeling the walls close in. In desperation, I shouted for help, but the silence that followed felt more suffocating than before. I turned to face the mirror, my face paling under the harsh light, and that's when I saw it. A figure stood behind me, its hollow eyes staring into my soul, a twisted smile spreading across its face. I spun around, but nothing was there. Gasping, I turned back to the mirror, and there it was again, closer, the smile widening. A promise of horror reflected back at me. The lights flickered violently, and I stumbled backward, the world tilting as the figure leaned closer, whispering words that sent chills down my spine. "You shouldn't have stayed." With a sudden crash, the door flew open, and light poured into the room. I turned to see no one there, only the empty hallway stretching before me, the air heavy with a silence that swallowed my screams. Stricken with fear, I bolted out of the bathroom, not daring to look back as a wave of coldness swept through, chilling me to the bone. The comfort of my apartment felt like a distant memory as I scrambled for my phone, dialing for help, praying that whatever haunted me that night would remain trapped in that bathroom, a dark secret hidden within the walls, leaving me forever changed. I always thought I was just an ordinary person leading an ordinary life, but what happened to me that summer shattered my perception of reality. It began with a move to an old farmhouse on the outskirts of a small town. The realtor had assured us it was a fixer-upper, but as my family settled in, I felt an inexplicable heaviness in the air, a weight of history pressing down on us. The house creaked and groaned at odd hours, and shadows seemed to linger just out of sight, darting away whenever I turned to look. My parents dismissed my fears as a product of an overactive imagination, but I knew something was amiss. The first entity I encountered was a whisper, soft and fleeting. I was lying in bed one night when I heard it clearly. "Help me." I bolted upright, my heart racing, convinced it was just my mind playing tricks. But the murmur persisted, growing louder each night until it felt like a presence wrapped around me, begging for attention. I decided to investigate. Armed with only a flashlight and my courage, I explored the dimly lit corridors of the house, following the sound of the whispers. I stumbled upon a small, hidden room in the basement, its door half buried under debris. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside, I found dusty old furniture covered in sheets and a chest in the corner. Kneeling down, I unlatched it and opened it to find old, yellowed letters and photographs. The name Catherine was scrawled across the top of each letter, and my heart sank as I realized the letters were from someone who had lived there decades ago. They were filled with longing and despair, detailing Catherine's life, her grief over the loss of her child, and how she was tormented by the feeling of being watched in her own home. As I read, I could feel the air grow colder, the atmosphere thick with sorrow. Suddenly, a chill swept through the room, and I heard her voice again, clearer now. "You found me." Panic surged through me, and I slammed the chest shut, bolting out of the room, convinced I had disturbed something that shouldn't have been touched. That night, I was awoken by an icy hand gripping my ankle. I screamed and kicked out, only to find nothing there. But the cold lingered, settling around me like a shroud. Days turned into weeks, and the disturbances only escalated. Objects began moving on their own, lights flickered without reason, and shadows danced at the periphery of my vision. My parents continued to brush away my concerns, oblivious to the growing darkness in our home. One evening, I was drawing in my room when I looked up to find a figure standing by my window. It was a woman, her face pale, eyes hollow, her mouth moving silently. I blinked, and she was gone, but her presence remained etched in my mind. Desperate, I returned to the hidden room, seeking answers. I found more letters, revealing the tragic fate of Catherine's child, a terrible accident that led to a premature death. But one letter caught my eye, detailing a ritual Catherine believed could bring her child back. The words chilled me to the bone, describing dark incantations and the summoning of lost souls. That night, the whispers became screams. I lay trembling in bed, terrified but unable to move. The walls echoed with desperate cries, and the temperature dropped sharply, my breath curling in front of me. I realized that the house was a vessel for Catherine's sorrow, her grief manifesting into something darker, something vengeful. I couldn't bear it any longer. The next day, I convinced my parents to leave. We had to get out before it consumed us entirely. When I told them about the presence, the whispers, and the letters, they finally believed me. We packed our things and fled, leaving the old farmhouse behind. As we drove away, I glanced back at the house, and for a brief moment, I saw Catherine standing in the window, looking forlorn and lost. Tears streamed down my face as I realized she would never find peace. To this day, I wonder what became of that house, of the history we'd stumbled upon, and of the restless spirit that remained bound to its walls. I once thought I was an ordinary person, but the haunting experience taught me that some histories cling to places like shadows, never truly leaving, forever whispering in the dark. As I sat in my dimly lit apartment, the city outside remained oblivious to the lingering dread that had settled within me. It all started a month ago when I happened upon an old, battered book in a dusty corner of a second-hand bookstore. The spine was cracked, and the pages were yellowed, but something compelled me to purchase it. The title, Whispers in the Dark, seemed to call to me, almost as if it were meant to be mine. I tucked it under my arm and walked out, the bell above the door chiming as I stepped into the brisk autumn air. That night, I began to read, the words spilling across the page like ink bleeding from a wound. Each sentence echoed with a sense of foreboding that wrapped around me like a vice, but I was drawn in deeper, unable to resist. The story unfolded in a small, isolated town plagued by a malevolent force that preyed on its residents' fears, stripping away their sanity. I felt a chill creep up my spine as the protagonist, much like myself, began to lose grip on reality. The book describes strange shadows flitting just beyond the edge of sight, whispers that echoed in the silence, and figures that emerged from the dark corners of rooms. I shivered as I read, convinced that the author had somehow tapped into some ancient truth. It wasn't long before the experiences described in the book began to bleed into my own life. At first, it was subtle, a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye or the feeling that someone was watching me. I brushed it off as overactive imagination, a side effect of my nightly reading. Yet, as the days passed, the occurrences became increasingly unnerving. I woke one night to find an inexplicable chill in my room, the air thick with an oppressive weight, and I could swear I heard hushed voices just beyond my window. Convinced it was merely the wind, I tried to shake the feeling but found myself glancing over my shoulder more frequently. A week after I finished the book, the doorbell rang late one evening. Confused, I approached the door with heavy trepidation. No one was ever at my door at this hour. Slipping the chain off, I cracked it open, and an icy gust rushed past me, carrying with it an overwhelming scent of decay. No one stood outside. I brushed it off as a prank or perhaps a fleeting figment of my mind. But then, the nightmares began. Dark, twisted images filled my sleep, shadows contorting into grotesque figures I couldn't comprehend. Each night was worse than the last, waking up in a cold sweat as I grappled with visions of that damned book, the characters begging for release from their torment. Desperation clawed at my sanity. I locked the book away in a drawer, praying that distance would drown the whispered horrors. I even invested in sage, burning it throughout my apartment, hoping to cleanse the aura that had seeped in. Yet, every ounce of light seemed to dim as the darkness spread. The chills, the whispers, and the feeling of being watched intensified. Friends began to notice my unease, their concern etched on their faces, but how could I possibly articulate what I had experienced? I felt like a character trapped in a poorly written horror film, a puppet for an unseen antagonist. Days turned into nights filled with palpable dread until I could take it no longer. With trembling hands, I reached for the book again, desperate for understanding. Flipping through the fragile pages, I noticed a passage that hadn't registered before, an incantation buried within the text. It promised release, but I hesitated. What if it was a trap? Something deep inside urged me on, as if the book's malignant force was whispering sweet nothings, luring me into submission. I steeled my resolve and recited the words, each syllable tumbling from my lips like a chant summoned from the abyss. As silence hung thick in the air, I felt a shift, a tremor in reality that rattled my bones. For a moment, I thought I could see the shadows coalescing, swirling together in angry defiance. Then, nothing. The room fell silent again, leaving only the remnants of fear hanging heavy like smoke. That night, I slept, but this time, it was different. There were no nightmares, only a consuming darkness that tightened around my chest. I awoke at dawn, unburdened but utterly drained. I felt a fleeting relief, but soon realized that something essential was missing. An emptiness echoed within me. I tried to shake off the disquieting sensation, but as the day turned to night, I noticed a distinct change. The shadows in my apartment seemed to lengthen, moving with an almost sentient intention. The whispers returned, now more coherent, weaving together tales of loss and despair that clawed at my resolve. I knew then that I had unleashed something I could not contain. Desperate and terrified, I rushed to the drawer, but the book lay there, untouched, undisturbed. I had broken its chains, but I was only the vessel, a temporary host to a malevolence that had found a foothold in my world. I had become the protagonist in someone else's story, one that promised no end. I stumbled into the streets, seeking help from anyone who might understand, but found only apathy. The world around me continued to spin, but I was ensnared in a darkness far greater than myself. People ignored my pleas, brushed past with indifferent gazes, their lives unaffected by the horrors I faced. I thought of burning the book, a final act of defiance, but fear stayed my hand. What if the act ignited the horror? The last thing I remember is standing on a street corner, pleading into the void, when the wind picked up, carrying the distant sounds of laughter, echoing from nowhere. I finally understood. I was trapped in a merciless cycle, condemned to relive a tale that didn't belong to me. I folded into the shadows that seemed to close in, embracing the dark, realizing it was no longer just the story haunting me, but I who had become the story itself. And somewhere, buried deep within that battered book, I could feel a new tale taking shape, one waiting for its next reader to unravel. As I sit in the dimly lit room, I can feel the chill creeping up my spine, an uncanny reminder of the events that transpired just a year ago. It was a seemingly ordinary Saturday evening when I decided to invite a few friends over for a movie night. But what started as a gathering of joy and laughter quickly spiraled into a nightmare that still haunts my thoughts. We set up the projector in my living room, the flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls, adding to the ambience as we kicked back with popcorn and sodas, blissfully ignorant of the darkness that lingered on the periphery of our merriment. The night wore on, and laughter bounced off the walls as we watched horror films, each jump scare pushing us closer together. It was during the second movie when the power went out, plunging us into a suffocating darkness that felt too heavy to bear. We laughed nervously at first, thinking it might just be a temporary glitch, but the joking soon turned to unease as the silence enveloped us. One of my friends, Lily, decided to use her phone's flashlight to illuminate the room, and we huddled close, sharing ghost stories to pass the time. It was all fun and games until someone suggested we play a game called Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board. I hesitated, recalling the countless horror movies we'd watched that warned against tempting fate, but the enthusiasm of my friends was infectious, and soon we were sitting cross-legged in a circle, heads bowed, eyes closed. As we began to chant the words, a sudden gust of frigid air rushed through the room, extinguishing the flashlight and plunging us into darkness once more. Panic surged through the group, but it only fueled our resolve to push on. We repeated the chant, feeling the air thicken with tension, and then something unbelievable happened. While we were all focused on the ritual, I felt a finger, cold as ice, brush against my neck. I gasped and bolted upright, my heart racing, shaking off the touch as my friends stared at me with wide eyes. But before I could voice my fear, Lily screamed. Her voice echoed in the darkness, sharp and terrified, and we turned to see her pale face illuminated by the faint, ghostly glow that began to flicker back to life. The power hadn't returned. It was something else entirely, something we couldn't comprehend. I crouched low, my instincts screaming at me to run, but the magnetic pull of curiosity kept me frozen. The light shimmered and danced around her, taking on a shape, a silhouette, tall and gaunt, emerging from the shadows. My breath caught in my throat. Panic set in as I realized we weren't alone anymore. I felt an unshakable dread wash over me, a gut feeling that screamed, "Get out." But my legs felt like lead, and curiosity and fear battled for dominance within me. The figure hovered, its hollow eyes boring into our souls, and I could feel the heaviness of despair radiating from it. My friends were paralyzed in terror, their faces a mix of disbelief and horror. As the entity drew closer to Lily, I heard a whisper, soft yet piercing, echoing through the room. "You shouldn't have summoned me." With that, the lights flickered once more, and in a blink, the figure lunged toward her. I don't remember what happened next, only that chaos erupted. Our screams pierced the air as we scattered, a mad dash for the door. The last thing I saw was Lily's terrified expression as she vanished into the darkness, swallowed by the entity. We stumbled outside, shivering in the night air, desperate to escape whatever had just breached the barrier between our world and the next. Our laughter had morphed into frantic cries, and the lingering chill followed us as we huddled together, trying to process what we had just witnessed. We called out for Lily, desperation clawing at our throats, but the silence was deafening. Hours passed as we searched for her, adrenaline and fear fueling our frantic searches through the neighborhood. She never returned. The police found no trace of her, and as days slipped into weeks, her absence became a haunting reminder of that cursed night. I replayed the events in my mind, haunted by my own skepticism and arrogance. Who was I to challenge the unknown? Now, as I sit in this dimly lit room, the shadows whisper her name, and the cold fingers of fear brush against my neck once more. Sometimes, I think I still hear her laughter, mingling with the silence, a bittersweet echo of a time before that night reduced us to mere fragments of ourselves. The scratching sound at the door, the flickering lights, they serve as reminders that some doors, once opened, are not easily shut, leaving a void where once there was life, forever marked by a sinister presence lurking just out of sight. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the old town, Anna felt an unsettling chill creep up her spine. The evening had begun like any other, with laughter echoing through the streets as she and her friends made their way to the dilapidated house at the end of Mayfield Lane, a place rumored to be haunted, where curious kids dared each other to enter at night. But Anna was different. She wasn't merely curious. An inexplicable pull had drawn her to the house since she was a child, an attraction that felt like a siren's call. whispering secrets of the past. The house, shrouded in vines and darkness, loomed before them, its windows cracked and dark like vacant eyes watching their every move. As they reached the porch, the wooden floorboards groaned beneath their feet, and a gust of wind whipped through the air, causing her to shudder despite the warmth of her friend's presence. They huddled together, exchanging nervous glances, the thrill of adventure battling with their instinct to flee. But Anna felt a strange calm wash over her, a sensation that it was finally time to confront the shadows that had been haunting her dreams for as long as she could remember. They pushed the creaking door open, only to be met with darkness that swallowed them whole. The musty smell of decay filled the air, and she felt the weight of history pressing down on her. This wasn't just an old house, it was a repository of sorrow. As they stepped inside, her heart raced, not from fear but from an undeniable sense of purpose. With every creak of the floor and whisper of the wind, memories long buried began swirling around her, a flicker of laughter, a flash of fear, a moment of loss that resonated deep within. Anna didn't understand why these echoes were so familiar, but they wrapped around her like a shroud, compelling her to delve deeper. Amidst the shadows, she spotted an old mirror standing against the wall, its surface tarnished and clouded with age. As she approached, she felt an electric thrill race through her body, a knowing that she was meant to see what lay within. Leaning closer, she wiped a patch of grime with her sleeve. The reflection that emerged shocked her, not with her own image, but with visions of a life not her own, a little girl laughing in the same room, a mother's gentle hands brushing through her hair, and then, abruptly, a visage of terror, a dark figure looming, a scream stifled by the grip of fear. The flickering images melded together, revealing a story of heartache, abandonment, and a need for closure, a mirror to her own memories, resonating with loss that felt as raw as if it had happened yesterday. Her friends called out to her, the worry evident in their voices, but she was entranced, caught in the web of the past. "Anna, let's go," one of them urged, but her feet felt glued to the floor, as if the house itself was drawing her in. Suddenly, she heard it, a faint whisper grazing her ears, a name she recognized but couldn't place. Elena. The name echoed in her mind, soft yet insistent, an ember igniting the depths of her memory. Confusion washed over her. She had never known an Elena, yet the name felt intertwined with her very being. The air grew thick with tension, the temperature dropping as shadows lengthened ominously. Panic surged through her friends, who began to tug at her arms, urging her to leave this place of sorrow. But Anna was anchored, her heart racing as a moment of clarity pierced the fog. Elena was her sister, the sister she had long believed to be lost to time, whispers of her existence swallowed by the void of forgetfulness. The weight of the revelation struck her like a physical blow. She stepped back from the mirror, the fragmented visions still swirling in her mind like a storm. A need to reconcile the past overwhelming her senses. "I have to know," she murmured softly, more to herself than anyone else, and her friends exchanged worried glances as they struggled to understand her descent into a memory they could not see. But Anna was ready to confront the truth, to unravel the ties that bound her to this haunted place. With newfound determination, she delved deeper into the house, her heart pounding in rhythm with the footsteps that followed. Each room revealed another glimpse of Elena's life, paintings of a vibrant girl, a doll left untouched, remnants of laughter trapped within the walls. But the heavy undertone of sadness lingered, each discovery feeling like a knife twisting deeper into her spirit, awakening a longing she had buried deep. As the night wore on, the house seemed to resonate with her realization, the walls echoing back the stories of love and loss. Yet, an unshakable dread hung in the air, punctuated by whispering sounds that danced just beyond the threshold of comprehension. "We should really go now," one friend insisted, but Anna's resolve only strengthened. She needed to finish this, to give voice to her sister's ghost, to lay the past to rest. As they stood in what must have been Elena's bedroom, the energy around them shifted, palpable and alive. Her friends huddled near the door, anxiety etched on their faces, but Anna stepped forward, the room pulsing with memories that seemed to beckon her, each resonating in her core. As she looked around, the darkness began to coalesce, forming shadows that took on tangible shapes, the figures of a mother and a daughter, dancing in the flickering light of impossible memories. This was her truth. This was unfinished business incarnate. The figures turned towards her, their eyes filled with the echoes of sorrow and love. Anna felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she longed to reach out, to connect. But as she did, a suffocating darkness enveloped her, and the shadows twisted menacingly, breaking her enchantment with a crushing grip. Panic surged inside her. "Help!" she cried, stumbling backward. The comforting warmth of her friends was gone. replaced by a coldness that pierced through her very soul. Just when she thought she might be swallowed whole by the darkness, a voice broke through the chaos, clear and familiar. "Anna, please." It was her sister, calling to her from the abyss. Summoning every ounce of strength, she fought against the darkness, forging a path toward that voice. She had to reach Elena, to embrace the love she had lost, to free them both from the pain that bound them to this place. In an instant, the room erupted with blinding light, the shadows shattering into a million pieces as she lunged forward. There, in the heart of the storm, stood her sister, a radiant figure bathed in ethereal light. "I've missed you, Anna," Elena whispered, a smile brightening her face, and in that moment, Anna felt the warmth of their bond washing over her, dissolving the darkness, freeing them both at last. Then, just as suddenly, the vision faded, leaving Anna gasping in empty silence, the echoes of laughter and love lingering like a distant dream. Her friends rushed to her side, concern etched on their faces. "What just happened?" one of them asked, but Anna struggled to find words, the weight of her experience grounding her, even as reality threatened to pull her back. She knew she had to go, to leave the house that had both haunted and healed her. As they stepped outside, the first light of dawn broke on the horizon, filling the world with colors she had never noticed before: white, gold, crimson, a rebirth, a new beginning. In that moment, Anna understood the true power of confronting her past, of facing the shadows that lingered. Hand in hand with her living friends, she turned away from the house, no longer burdened by secrets but liberated by love and memory, realizing that while shadows may linger in the corners of our hearts, it is the light we choose to carry forward that defines our journeys. It was a typical Friday evening when I decided to take a long walk down the desolate roads of my small town. The sun was setting, casting eerie shadows that danced among the trees, and a feeling of unease washed over me. I often found solace in walking alone, but tonight felt different, thick with an oppressive silence. My mind wandered as I meandered through the familiar paths, and I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. A chill skittered down my spine, but I shrugged it off as imagination, a mere byproduct of the twilight hour. As I rounded a corner near the abandoned playground, something caught my eye, a flicker of movement amongst the rusting swings. I paused, squinting into the dimming light, but nothing was there. Just my mind playing tricks on me, I told myself, and I pressed on, my senses heightened. Moments later, I noticed a figure standing in the distance, partially obscured by the trees. I felt a mixture of curiosity and dread. However, I was drawn to the shadow. I took a cautious step forward, and the figure seemed to twitch, as though it were alive yet not human. The closer I got, the more details surfaced. It had an oddly elongated body, limbs that were too thin, and a head that was far too large for its frame. It stood still, its face devoid of features save for a gaping maw that opened in an unsettling, gnarled smile. Panic surged through me, but I could not pull away. I'd never believed in such things. This had to be some sort of trick of the light, right? Gathering what little courage I had, I called out to it, my voice shaking. "Hey, are you okay?" The figure did not move. Instead, its smile widened, and the silence around us deepened, punctuated only by the rustle of leaves. It seemed to beckon with a slow, deliberate motion. Against all instincts, I took another step closer, feet almost moving of their own accord. The image of this creature was too surreal, like something born from a nightmare, yet I felt an insistent pull towards it. Just as I reached the edge of the tree line, it lurched towards me, and adrenaline coursed through my veins as the instinct to flee hit me like a wave. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush and clawing my way back to the main road, my heart pounding in my ears. I risked a glance over my shoulder, and to my horror, it stood in the same spot, watching me with a grotesque stillness. My lungs burned with each breath as I pushed myself faster until I finally stumbled onto the familiar streetlights of my neighborhood, each one a beacon of safety. Finally, I reached my home, the door slamming shut behind me. I locked it and leaned against the cool surface, my mind racing. I had to convince myself that it was all just a figment of my imagination, a trick of the twilight shadows. Yet every night thereafter, I felt its presence lurking just beyond the edge of my sight, a haunting memory that refused to fade. Sleep became elusive. I spent countless nights staring at the ceiling, haunted by the thought that perhaps it had not been a mere dream. I convinced myself to put it behind me and resume my usual routine, but every time I stepped outside, I could feel eyes on me, unblinking. One evening, desperate for a sense of normalcy, I met with friends at a local cafe. We laughed and shared stories, but the warmth of their company was pierced by a lingering chill in my bones. I told myself to breathe, Yet as I glanced out the window, there it was, standing just beyond the cafe's reach, a silhouette against the backdrop of the setting sun. My stomach dropped. It had followed me. As the laughter around me faded, reality set in. This was no longer a fleeting encounter. This entity had become my shadow, its grin haunting my thoughts, pushing me into paranoia. Weeks turned into months, and the creature remained, a constant dark presence at the periphery of my life. I experimented with different measures, moved furniture to block my view of the windows, kept lights ablaze late into the night, and even sought refuge in the crowded places of our town, but nothing could draw it away. In desperation, I researched folklore and local legends, but no mention of its kind ever surfaced. My fear grew until I finally reached a tipping point. I sought the help of an old woman in town rumored to commune with spirits. She lived on the outskirts, a lonely figure shrouded in mystery. As I entered her cramped home filled with strange artifacts, she looked at me with those knowing eyes. When I recounted my tale, her expression darkened. "You've attracted something unwanted," she warned. "It feeds on fear. The more you fear it, the stronger it becomes." I was filled with dread. She handed me a small charm and instructed me to carry it with me always, to face my fears head on, and to regain control. I returned home and clutched the charm tightly. From that night, I resolved I would no longer allow the creature to govern my life. I would confront it. Each evening, I sat by my window facing the trees, heart racing yet determined. As the shadows danced before me, I called out, demanding that it show itself. The air grew thick with tension, and finally, in the silence, a familiar shape began to emerge. "You cannot have me," I screamed, feeling the power of my defiance surround me like a shield. The figure halted mid-step, the smile faltering. It seemed to phase for a moment, its expression shifting from malicious to fragile, as if my fearless stance was breaking through its hold on me. With a final, feral hiss, the creature retreated back into the depths of the woods, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. I collapsed back against the wall, breathing heavily, heart pounding. That night, I finally slept, a dreamless abyss devoid of nightmares. And as dawn broke, I felt a lightness in my chest. I had reclaimed my life. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel that familiar chill, a whisper on the wind reminding me that I had danced with darkness. And though I had survived, a part of me wondered if I could ever be truly free. The creature had tasted my fear, and even in its absence, could it ever truly be gone? The moon hung heavy in the night sky, casting an eerie glow over the old, decrepit house at the end of Maple Street. They said it was haunted, but I had always dismissed the rumors as mere whispers carried by the occasional gust of wind. Growing up in a small town, the tales of the haunted house had become a form of urban legend, a Halloween favorite that sparked excitement in the hearts of bored teenagers. But that night, I found myself drawn to the house, compelled by a force I couldn't explain. It was as if the shadows between the cracks and the rotting wood were beckoning me closer. My heart raced with curiosity and a touch of fear as I approached the weathered front door, its peeling paint whispering stories of neglect and sorrow. I had always loved a good thrill, but nothing could prepare me for what awaited inside. With shaking hands, I pushed the door open. It creaked, a sound that echoed through the vast emptiness of the house. The air felt thick, as if the atmosphere itself held its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight as I stepped inside. The floors groaned underfoot, seemingly alive, protesting my intrusion. I shone the light around the room, revealing faded wallpaper, once vibrant but now dulled by time and neglect. Family portraits hung crookedly on the walls, eyes following me with an unsettling intensity. I had a brief moment of whimsy, imagining them as guardians, protecting their forgotten realm. As I turned to explore further, a chill crawled up my spine, a sudden draft that whispered secrets too faint to understand. As I wandered through the dimly lit hallways, the house felt as if it were waking up. It sighed and whispered, as if it had been dormant for years, finally receiving a visitor. The atmosphere shifted. Shadows seemed to gather deeper in the corners, thickening as if drawn to my presence. I stepped into a parlor, and my flashlight fell upon a dusty piano, its keys yellowed and cracked. Against my better judgment, I approached, fingers itching to play a note. Just as I pressed down on a key, a discordant note rang out, echoing like a warning. I pulled my hand back, heart pounding. Had I imagined it? Or was something else in the room with me? I turned to leave but froze when I saw a reflection in the cracked mirror hanging on the wall, a flash of movement, a fleeting shadow that vanished before I could fully grasp it. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling slightly. The sound seemed absurd in the heavy silence. My breath caught in my throat when I heard a soft reply, something not quite human, echoing my words back at me. mocking me. I stumbled backward, the pulse in my ears growing louder, drowning out all rational thought. I needed to get out. The thrill was gone, replaced by a primal fear that resonated deep within my bones. I turned to flee, adrenaline surging through my veins, but the hallway that had once felt like an adventure now twisted and warped before my eyes. The air thickened, making it hard to breathe, and I could hear the soft padding of feet behind me, the unmistakable sound of pursuit. I dashed through the house, flinging myself through doorways that seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls closing in on either side. The sounds of the house were alive now, whispers of secrets, laughter that echoed like a taunt, and the unyielding rhythm of footsteps gaining. I finally burst through a door into what looked like a dining room. The table set as if for a long-ago dinner, everything dust-covered and still. I spun around, the panic settling like ice in my veins. In that moment, I realized I had lost all sense of direction, of time. I was truly alone, yet I could feel an unseen presence closing in. I could hear it breathing now, low and raspy, echoing from the corners of the room. The shadows shifted, and for a horrifying second, I thought I could discern figures forming, wispy outlines that reached for me, pleading and angry all at once. My survival instinct kicked in, and I turned to the only window in the room, desperate for escape. I shoved it open, the glass fractured beneath my weight. But I didn't care. I climbed out into the night air, lungs filled with the cool, fresh scent of freedom. I fell onto the ground, dazed, staring up at the house. The windows seemed to pulse with life, and I could have sworn I saw faces peering out, mouths moving in what looked like laughter that echoed in my mind. Pulling me back into their nightmarish embrace. I ran down the path, fueled by pure adrenaline, never looking back. As I reached the safety of the streetlight at the end of the road, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. The house loomed silently, the wind whispering through the branches overhead, leaving me with the haunting echo of a quiet warning. The tales of the past are not always just stories. Sometimes they reach out from the shadows, eager to drag the curious back into their depths. I never returned to that house again. The darkness had claimed enough souls, and I was unwilling to join their ranks in the stories that lingered long after the sun set. I'll never forget that night. It was late November, the kind of night when the chill creeps into your bones and the moon hangs low in the sky like a watchful eye. I had just moved into an old, creaking house on the outskirts of town, a charming piece of architecture that had seen better days. My friends warned me about its history, rumors of hauntings, strange noises, and odd occurrences, but I brushed them off as nothing more than urban legends. With the excitement of a fresh start, I settled in, unpacking boxes and placing furniture. The house had character, and I enjoyed feeling like I had a place to call my own. It wasn't long before the first unsettling thing happened. A few nights in, while I was reading in bed, I heard faint whispers echoing through the halls. I thought it must have been the wind or my imagination playing tricks on me. But each night, the whispers grew louder, more coherent, spilling into my dreams, where shadowy figures danced just out of reach. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that it was just the house settling, old pipes creaking. As the days turned into weeks, however, things took a darker turn. I began to find objects in the house moved from where I'd left them. My keys, my books, even the furniture seemed slightly shuffled. I dismissed it as forgetfulness until I discovered a photograph of a family I didn't recognize hanging on the wall of the living room. I had never put it there, yet it felt oddly familiar, almost as if I was meant to find it. That night, the whispers escalated into urgent murmurs, carrying a tone of distress. Unable to sleep, I wandered through the dimly lit house, checking every corner. As I passed by the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure in the mirror, a fleeting image of a woman with hollow eyes staring back at me. My heart raced, and I stumbled backward, convinced my mind was playing tricks on me. The following night, the temperature in the house dropped significantly. I could see my breath in front of me, and the whispers transformed into cries, echoing through the rooms like a desperate plea for help. I felt a heavy presence pressing against me, suffocating and cold. It filled me with dread, yet curiosity gnawed at me. I began to research the history of the house. According to old town records, it had once belonged to a family that mysteriously vanished decades ago. Their names were tied to legends of tragedy and despair, whispered about in hushed tones by locals who preferred forgetting the past. I reached out to neighboring families, gathering pieces of the story: lost children, a broken marriage, accusations of madness. The final piece of the puzzle came when I learned the woman in the photograph was the mother, forever haunting the home she had lost. Desperate for answers, I conducted a seance, hoping to communicate with whatever spirit lingered within those walls. The air thickened, and the candles flickered as I called upon the entity. To my surprise, the whispers intensified, coalescing into a single voice that echoed in my mind, begging for release, for understanding. It spoke of pain, regret, and longing, revealing the circumstances of its tragic end. The woman recounted how she had lost her children in a fire that engulfed the house, a fire she believed was her fault. As her sorrow unfolded, I felt the weight of her grief, and I began to weep for the family that had endured so much pain within these walls. It became clear that she was not a malevolent spirit but a desperate mother, seeking closure. The following days, I set out to find the truth, piecing together the fragments of the past. I visited the sites mentioned in whispered folklore, uncovering detailed accounts of the tragedy that had befallen the family, the neglect, the loneliness, the haunting guilt that led to the fire. I returned home, determined to honor their memory. I arranged for a small memorial in the backyard, placing flowers and lighting candles, whispering words of compassion to the wind. That night, for the first time since moving in, the house was silent. The whispers and shadows faded, leaving an eerie but comforting calm. I felt the weight of the past begin to lift, and each night following, I sensed a gentle presence watching over me, a feeling of thanks for acknowledging their struggles. Though the history of the house would forever linger, I was no longer afraid. I had embraced the shadows and listened to their stories, allowing the lost souls to reclaim a fragment of peace. And so, I learned that sometimes, the most profound form of horror lies not in the supernatural realm, but in the tragic tales woven into the fabric of our shared existence, inviting us to remember and honor, rather than to fear. It was a damp evening when I first moved into the old Victorian house at the end of Wisteria Lane. The townsfolk had whispered warnings about its dark past, but I was drawn to its creaky charm. The first night, I felt a chill race down my spine, a sensation I brushed off as nerves. The walls whispered secrets in the wind, and shadows danced in the corners of my vision. I set up my camera, fascinated by the notion of capturing the unseen, that which lingered just beyond the veil of reality. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers grew louder, indistinct yet urgent, infusing the air with a sense of dread. One night, I sat in the parlor, reviewing my footage, hoping for an explanation for the flickers of movement and fleeting shadows. In one particular frame, a reflection in the old mirror caught my eye, an apparition standing just behind me. I froze, heart pounding, the color draining from my face. I turned to find nothing. The room remained cold and still. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, simply a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew something was watching me, waiting. Weeks passed, and the feeling intensified. I could hear footsteps in the hallways, pacing back and forth as if an unseen presence was restless, trapped within the confines of the house. I began to dread the solitude I once craved. Friends encouraged me to leave, but I was stubbornly attached to the captivating mystery. As the full moon rose high one night, a sense of urgency overwhelmed me. I had to confront what was haunting this place. I gathered my courage, grabbed my flashlight, and ventured into the basement where the air was unbearably thick. The atmosphere was heavy, as if the walls were breathing, alive with despair. Shadows twisted and shifted, and I felt a shiver race down my spine. In the far corner, a glimmer caught my eye, a dusty old trunk, locked and forgotten. My heart raced, and I fought the urge to turn back. I pried it open, the hinges squealing in protest, revealing a collection of strange, decaying artifacts, an old diary, jewelry pieces that sparkled dimly even in the dark, and photographs of a family I didn't recognize. I picked up the diary, its pages brittle and yellowed with age. As I read through the frantic scrawls, my stomach churned. It spoke of betrayal, sorrow, and a desperate plea for forgiveness from the very family that once thrived in this house. They had been happy until tragedy struck, leaving behind anger and unresolved conflict that twisted into something more sinister. A chill coursed through me. The family hadn't left just in spirit, they had left their anguish. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned, expecting to see nothing, but there she stood, a translucent figure, her eyes hollow and pleading. The air shimmered around her, and I realized she looked just like one of the women in the photos, her sorrow palpable, a tether binding her to this realm. In a fragmented whisper, she spoke of her lost family, the unresolved pain that had kept her rooted here. I understood. She was not malevolent, just trapped between worlds, yearning for closure. In that moment, I saw the remnants of her life flash before her eyes, the joy, the heartache, the betrayal, all woven into the fabric of this crumbling home. I made a promise, vowing to help her find peace. The storm that raged outside grew louder, rattling the windows, but I held my ground, consumed by the weight of her sorrow. Night after night, I researched her family, piecing together their tragic history, and soon discovered an old burial site not far from the house. I reached out to the town's historical society, uncovering the truth of their demise and unraveling the long-buried secrets that had kept them anchored in despair. Finally, on a stormy night that mirrored the very one they had suffered long ago, I gathered the strength to hold a makeshift memorial. Beneath the pouring rain, I placed flowers at their graves and offered heartfelt words of remembrance. In that moment, I felt the air shift, a wave of relief washing over me. I glanced back at the house, the windows dark yet comforting, and saw her standing there, a soft smile on her face. A bright light enveloped her, and, just like that, she was gone. The weight that had burdened the house for years lifted, leaving behind a profound silence. Since that day, the house transformed. The walls felt lighter, the air less oppressive, and the shadows less threatening. I spent more nights in peace, finally able to embrace the beauty of the Victorian charm without fear gripping my heart. Yet, even after all I had experienced, there was one lingering thought. What if there were others, hidden stories bound to the walls, waiting for someone to listen? As I drifted off to sleep each night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was never truly alone in that house, that the stories of the past still had a way of echoing through the present, reminding me of the thin veil between life and the afterlife, and the silent cries for help that occasionally find their way into the living world, like whispers carried on the wind. It was the kind of night when the air felt thick with unease, and shadows danced menacingly in the flickering light of the single bulb in my bedroom. I was alone in my childhood home, a place that had long been abandoned by my family, left to gather dust and memories. I was drawn back here by an inexplicable urge, perhaps a desperate need to confront the ghosts of my past, both literal and figurative. The air was stale, carrying the faint scent of musty wood and decay, but I could not shake the feeling that I was not truly alone. As I settled onto the old, creaking bed, memories flooded my mind, laughter echoing through the halls, a game of hide-and-seek, the warm embrace of my mother as she tucked me in at night. But every joyous recollection was tainted by the shadows that lurked just beyond my sight, the dark corners of the house where light seemed to shun. That evening, the stillness was pierced by a sound, a soft thud from downstairs. My heart raced as I sat up, every instinct screaming at me to flee, yet something, perhaps foolish curiosity or some deeper urge, compelled me to investigate. With every step I took down the dusty staircase, I felt the weight of the house pressing in on me, walls whispering secrets I wasn't ready to hear. The old wooden banister was smooth under my hand, but the chill in the air clung to my skin like a death grip. Each step echoed, low and haunting, as I reached the darkened hallway below. I peered into the living room, the moonlight casting eerie shadows across the furniture, revealing nothing but the remnants of forgotten days. Yet, the feeling was palpable, as if eyes were watching me, hidden in the dark. I called out, my voice shaky, "Hello? Is anyone there?" The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. But soon, I caught a glimpse of movement. A figure darted past the edge of the room, too quick for me to comprehend. I squinted into the darkness, heart pounding, adrenaline flooding my veins. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice stronger now, driven by fear and a desperate need for answers. But the room remained silent, holding on to its secrets. I began to back away slowly, suddenly aware of how the darkness seemed to swallow the light around me. That's when I noticed it, a childhood drawing I had long forgotten, pinned crookedly on the wall. It depicted a woman with hollow eyes and a wide, twisted smile, her hand outstretched as if reaching for something just beyond the page. A shiver ran down my spine as I stared at it, recalling the nights when I would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that she was standing at the foot of my bed, just watching, waiting. The memory brought forth more than fear. It felt like a warning. I turned to leave, retreating back towards the stairs, but the thud of my footsteps was punctuated by another sound, a low, guttural whisper echoing through the house, curling around me like smoke. "Stay with me." Panic rose within me as I scrambled up the stairs, feeling the weight of the darkness bearing down on me. I slammed the bedroom door shut, locking it, and pressed my back against it, trying to catch my breath. The whispers grew louder, filling my mind with chaos, their meaning too vague yet too compelling to ignore. But amid the dread, a memory broke through, vivid and undeniable. During one particularly restless night in that house, I had found an old photo album, flipping through the pages filled with images of my family and friends, laughter frozen in time. But there was one photo that stood out, an oddity amid the normalcy, a picture of that very drawing I had seen moments ago, Yet in the background was a woman with a striking resemblance to the figure, the same hollow eyes, the same twisted smile. I had never noticed her before, not until my mind had pieced it together. A chill ran through me at the thought. "What do you want?" I shouted into the darkness, my voice quivering in defiance. The whispers ceased, replaced by a deafening silence. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath. Moments stretched into an eternity until a soft knock echoed from the door. I pressed myself against it, unease creeping like a vine up my spine. "Let me in," a voice called, sweet yet filled with an unsettling longing. "I won't hurt you." Something within the timbre of that voice felt familiar, wrapping around my mind like a comforting blanket even as it sent shivers down my spine. The air grew heavier, thick with anticipation and dread. "I just want to be with you. Don't you remember me?" It was then I realized the voice belonged not to a ghost I'd ever known, but rather to the very essence of my childhood fears, a part of me I had buried long ago. My breath faltered, heart racing painfully against my ribs. I don't want to remember," I murmured, feeling the pull of the darkness around me. But the knocking continued, insistent and soft, like raindrops on a tin roof. "Don't you want to know the truth?" The words took on a different quality, like a siren song tugging at my very being. The truth. The truth, yes. The memories of a child's laughter intermixed with the fear of something lurking just beyond the door. I felt the weight of those lost days starting to crack the walls I had built to keep that fear at bay. I reached for the doorknob but hesitated, realizing the implication of what I was about to do. The whispers started again, swirling around me, urging me to succumb. "Just open the door," they chorused. "You'll finally understand." With a strength I didn't know I had, I pulled my hand back, denying their call, desperately searching for clarity in the madness. "No, you're not real," I cried, voice breaking. The whispers grew furious, pounding now against the wood, more frantic as I pressed my palms against the door as if to hold off a tide of memories I wasn't ready to face. Stay with me." Silence followed my outburst. The thick tension of the house returned, wrapping around me like a suffocating embrace. Minutes turned to hours as I remained there, waiting for the inevitable, for whatever lay beyond that door to break through. After what felt like a lifetime, the whispers faded, leaving behind nothing but the echo of my heartbeat in the silence. Slowly, cautiously, I began to breathe again, every inhale steadying my pulse. But as I finally gathered enough courage to turn and face the darkness of my room, I felt it. A cold breath, brushing against my neck, sending ice through my veins. It wasn't over. Whatever had come back to haunt me was only just beginning. It was a chilly October evening when I decided to revisit the old house on the outskirts of town, a place I had avoided for years. As a child, I often heard the whispers of my friends, each daring the other to step foot inside that dilapidated structure where legend spoke of misfortune and madness. But curiosity had a way of beckoning me back, urging me to confront the haunting memories that lingered in my mind. With each step along the overgrown path leading to the entrance, the wind seemed to howl, carrying echoes of laughter and sorrow intertwined. The house stood like a dark sentinel against the twilight sky, its broken windows resembling hollow eyes that had seen unspeakable things. I pushed the creaking door open, the rusted hinges protesting loudly as if warning me not to enter. The air inside was thick with the smell of decay, and dust particles danced in the muted light filtering through grimy windows. I hesitated but crossed the threshold, drawn in by a mix of nostalgia and dread. My footsteps echoed through the empty halls, reverberating with the memories of my childhood, games played, secrets shared, and the first time I felt the inexplicable chill that wrapped around my heart. As I wandered through the rooms, fragments of my past flashed before me. The cluttered dining room where my parents would host raucous dinners, the sunlit living room where I learned to ride my first bike in place, and the narrow, winding stairs leading to the attic where I dared my friends to spend the night. Yet, it was the attic that ignited a spark of fear within me. I had always felt something lurking in the shadows there, an unseen presence that I couldn't quite comprehend, a whisper that barely touched my ears, luring me closer yet making me recoil in terror. Mustering my courage, I climbed the rickety staircase, each step creaking beneath my weight like a warning. The air grew colder with every ascent, wrapping me in a suffocating embrace. When I finally reached the attic door, I hesitated, my heart pounding with a primal instinct that screamed at me to turn back. But the door stood slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. I pushed it open and stepped into the dimly lit space, illuminated only by a shard of moonlight creeping through a cracked window. Dust motes swirled in the air, forming ghostly shapes that made my breath hitch. As I scanned the room, my eyes fell upon a large, ornate mirror standing against the far wall, covered in a layer of dust. Something about it sent a chill through my spine. It seemed out of place, elegant and grand amidst the decay that surrounded it. I approached it cautiously, my reflection wavering in the murky glass. But then I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. My reflection was not quite right. Behind me, in the dim light, a shadow shifted, darting away just as I turned my head. I whipped around, my instincts screaming that I wasn't alone, but the attic was empty. I returned my gaze to the mirror, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw something. A figure stood behind me, a silhouette cloaked in darkness, an intangible presence that sent a wave of ice through my veins. I staggered back, my breath quickening, and I cursed myself for not having brought a flashlight. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't bear. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over me, urging me to flee. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on something unseen, sending me sprawling to the ground. My hands scraped against the floor, and I felt the cold touch of the wooden planks against my skin. Heart racing, I pushed myself up, ready to escape the attic and the whisper of that shadow. Just as I turned to run, the mirror's surface rippled once more, and before I could take another step, a chilling laugh echoed through the attic, the sound insidious and filled with malice. It was then I realized that the laughter wasn't just a sound, it was a taunt, a beckoning that pulled at the frayed edges of my sanity. Panic surged within me, and I sprinted toward the stairs, my heart hammering in my chest like a war drum. I stumbled down the steps, nearly tripping over my own feet as the shadows seemed to come alive, stretching out toward me like long, skeletal fingers. I burst through the door, the temptation to look back overwhelming. With every step, I could feel the weight of unseen eyes following me, a sense of urgency propelling me forward as I half ran, half fell down the path towards freedom. The cool night air hit my face, and I breathed deeply, desperate to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the house. But as I turned to glance back one last time, I froze. There in the attic window stood the shadowy figure, staring down at me with hollow, lifeless eyes, a twisted grin plastered across its face. My blood ran cold, and I spun around, sprinting down the overgrown path while trying to block out the echo of the ominous laughter that followed me. As I burst into the safety of the streetlights, my heart began to slow, but that dreadful feeling lingered, a reminder of the thing I had felt, the thing I had glimpsed, the darkness that seemed to stretch beyond the walls of that cursed house. That night changed me. I could no longer walk past that house without feeling the weight of its secrets. I had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had looked back. I remember that summer vividly, the sticky heat, the scent of pine and damp earth, but mostly I recall the strange shadows that loomed over the old farmhouse where I spent what was supposed to be a carefree holiday. My family had just moved to the outskirts of town, and my parents thought it would be a perfect way to immerse ourselves in nature. But as soon as we pulled up to the peeling white structure, I felt a chill run down my spine, a strange and unsettling sensation that I couldn't quite shake off. The house had history, at least that's what the locals whispered when my father asked around. They spoke of mysterious fires that had consumed homes nearby and inexplicable disappearances in the woods surrounding us. But my father shrugged them off, dismissing it as the town's tall tales meant to frighten newcomers. I wanted to believe him, but the house felt alive in a way that unsettled me. It had long, crooked hallways that seemed to stretch on forever, doors that creaked open to reveal nothing but dust-covered furniture, and a basement that felt like a gaping maw, ready to swallow secrets whole. I tried to ignore the feeling, convincing myself that it was just the residue of a child's vivid imagination, but strange things began happening almost immediately. It started with whispers, soft, unintelligible whispers that floated through the night, slithering beneath my bedroom door and coiling into my ears while I lay beneath the covers, drenched in sweat, staring at the ceiling. I chalked it up to the wind, but when I gathered the courage to investigate, the house was always eerily still, the air thick with silence, a quiet so profound it almost felt suffocating. My little sister, Lily, wasn't afraid. She embraced the environment, running around the yard, chasing butterflies and collecting the shiny pebbles she found scattered on the ground. Sometimes, I would catch her talking to the trees, her laughter ringing out like delicate chimes, and I'd roll my eyes, telling her to stop playing make-believe. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lily rushed into the house, her eyes bright with excitement. "I made a friend," she exclaimed, her hair tousled as if she'd just run through a storm. I chuckled and ruffled her hair, thinking it was just another imaginary friend, like the one she had during our city life. "What's his name?" I asked, humor dancing in my voice. "Ethan," she said, her smile fading just a touch. He said he lived here a long, long time ago. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine at the name. I had seen an old newspaper clipping in the basement about a boy named Ethan who had gone missing from the area decades earlier. My heart raced as I tried to steady my voice. That's nice, Lily, but don't talk to strangers, okay? I decided it best to keep the clipping to myself, knowing how quickly parents could spiral into panic. Later that night, the noises ramped up. I lay wide awake, the whispers louder now, merging into a language I'd never heard, a cacophony of sorrow and longing. I wanted to scream, but the fear paralyzed me. I flinched at every creak and groan of the house settling, each sound a reminder that something was off, that something was watching. Days turned into weeks. The whispers turned into faint cries, echoing through the halls at all hours of the night. And I knew then that whatever existed in this house was growing fond of Lily. It filled my heart with dread. She no longer just played with Ethan. She talked about him incessantly. He's so nice, she'd say with a brightness that made my stomach twist. He tells me stories about the woods. Each night became a battle as I tried to keep her safe. I hid her away from the yard after sunset, but I caught glimpses of her staring wistfully out of the window, green eyes gleaming with an unholy light. It became unbearable when she began disappearing for hours. I would find her wandering the woods. I was just playing with Ethan, she would say as I dragged her back to the house, dread tightening its grip on my chest. On the last night of our stay, my parents had gone into town to run errands, and I was left alone with Lily. She was unusually quiet. The shadows inside the house seemed to deepen, stretching with the twilight, wrapping around corners like a predator ready to pounce. It was then that I decided to muster the courage to confront whatever lingering presence had gripped my sister's mind. I found her standing at the back door, staring outside, the silhouette of the trees looming eerily behind her, their gnarled branches reaching out like fingers. "Lily, come away from there," I said, my voice steady, but the tremor of fear betrayed me. "Let's play a game inside." She turned to me, and I was struck by how different she looked, almost hollow, her eyes two deep wells of darkness. "Ethan is waiting for me," she said in a voice that didn't sound entirely like hers. My heart dropped. I felt panic clawing at my throat. "No, Lily, we need to stay inside. It's late." But my words were met with silence. The air in the room grew cold, as if something was absorbing the warmth. A whisper brushed past me, incoherent but urgent. I stepped forward, pulling her away from the door, but her small frame felt locked in place, the connection with whatever dwelled outside too strong to break. "Ethan wants to show me something," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes, and it struck me that she was no longer just a little girl but a vessel for something far more sinister. I lost all sense of sanity in that moment. I pulled her back, enveloping her in my arms, and darted toward the basement, desperate to escape whatever influence was creeping into the house. The darkness wrapped around us as the door slammed shut, sealing the sounds of the outside world away. Ethan, leave us alone," she screamed, the sound ripping through my heart. I pressed my hand over her mouth, terrified of what might emerge if I let the words escape. The shadows danced wildly, pulsating with fury as they seemed to claw at the door. "Lily, listen to me. We have to get out of here," I pleaded, tugging desperately at her as she screamed to go back outside. Suddenly, the door rattled violently, and I pressed my body against it, praying for it to hold. The whispers turned chaotic, reverberating off the basement walls, but then, just as suddenly, they stopped. There was an eerie silence that filled every crevice of the air around us, and for a fleeting moment, I thought maybe we had escaped whatever was trying to take her. But then there came a soft knock on the door, gentle at first, like a request rather than a threat. "Let me in," came a voice, deep, resonant, almost melodic. It sent ice through my veins. I couldn't let it in. Whatever was outside, whatever was trying to lure Lily away, was not to be trusted. "It's okay, Lily. I promise we're safe down here. Let's wait until morning," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady, but she trembled against me. Then came another knock, louder this time, and the floor began to shake. "Let me in. Let me in," the voice boomed, an echo of anger and desperation that sent tremors through my bones. I braced myself against the door as the knocking turned to pounding, resonating like thunder around us. The shadows slipped under the cracks, curling around our feet, whispering seductively as they urged Lily to release whatever grip I had on her. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing more than anything to wake up from this nightmare, a dream in which I could just ignore the existence of the beyond. But this was no dream, and things grew worse. The door splintered, cracks forming under the weight of the force pressing against it. I knew there was no escape. Just as the door was about to break, silence enveloped us once more. It was thick and suffocating, filled only with Lily's frantic breathing. I dared to peek, to look over my shoulder as the air shifted, the once palpable darkness retreating momentarily as if contemplating its next move. Then, a warmth washed over the room, enveloping us like a soft blanket, and for a brief moment, I felt comfort in the embrace of familiarity. "Lily," I whispered, my heart racing. She stood there, eyes glazed over, transfixed by something I could not see. Her expression changed, something deep and otherworldly flickered in her gaze. "He says it's time." My heart dropped as my grip slackened. Agony surged through me at the thought of losing her, and I reached out, my fingertips brushing her shoulder in plea. There was a sudden rush of energy, and the room erupted in swirls of darkness and light. I cried out, desperately pulling her to me, but it was too late. The shadow surged, enveloped her, and she vanished from my grip, into a realm beyond my reach. My scream echoed against the basement walls, swallowed by the suffocating silence that followed. I was left alone in the dark, shaken by the realization of what had just transpired, made to bear the weight of an empty space where my little sister had stood. For the first time, I felt the truth of the house's history, a labyrinth of loss and despair, the shadows alive with voices that lingered beyond time. And as I sat there, alone in the darkness, I could only hope that somewhere, somehow, Lily found peace in the embrace of the friend she so dearly adored. It had been a long, oppressive summer in the small town of Willow Creek, where the humidity clung to the skin like a second layer and the sun seemed to burn with an unrelenting intensity. I, a restless teenager with a taste for the macabre, often wandered the woods that bordered my backyard, seeking adventure and an escape from the monotony of life. The woods were dense, a carpet of rich greens and browns, filled with the voices of unseen creatures. Local folklore spoke of spirits and ill-fated souls who roamed these woods, but these tales only fueled my curiosity. One sultry evening, as I made my way deeper into the thicket, I stumbled across an old, decrepit cabin, its wooden planks warped and gnarled, draped in moss and shadow. The door hung askew, creaking slightly as I pushed it open, revealing a dark interior, like a mouth ready to swallow me whole. I hesitated, glancing back at the fading light filtering through the trees, but the thrill of discovery compelled me forward. Inside, the air was musty and still, filled with the scent of mold and neglect. My footsteps echoed in the silence as I moved cautiously, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. Strange markings covered the walls, symbols I couldn't decipher, each one whispering secrets of the past, a warning, perhaps. I felt the urge to leave, but a compelling force held me captive. As I explored, I noticed remnants of another life, an overturned chair, a dust-covered table, and an old journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. I opened it gingerly, a chill running down my spine as I deciphered the frantic scrawl within. The entries detailed a man's descent into madness, a failed attempt to contact entities from beyond, each word dripping with despair. He spoke of shadows that followed him, voices that beckoned him deeper into the woods. The final entry, scrawled hastily, spoke of an impending darkness, something that had taken hold of him, watching, waiting. My skin crawled with unease, but curiosity twisted my gut. I put the journal down, a part of me screaming to leave while another part wanted to stay, to dig deeper. As night fell, the forest outside transformed. The sounds became sharper, whispering secrets of the night, and the shadows lengthened ominously, stretching like fingers toward the cabin. Suddenly, a rustle echoed from the corner of the room, sending a jolt of fear racing through me. My breath hitched as I turned, half expecting to see a creature lurking in the dark. Instead, I found nothing but an old, dusty mirror leaning against the wall. My reflection stared back, but something felt off. The image shifted slightly, and I could have sworn I saw something move just behind my reflection, an indistinct shadow, fleeting and dark. Panic gripped me, urging me to flee. I backed away, heart racing, but my foot caught on a loose floorboard, sending me crashing to the ground. The sound reverberated through the silence, and in that moment, the atmosphere around me thickened. A heaviness descended, punctuated by the soft whispering in the corners of my mind. It was then that I noticed it. The air had grown cold, a frigid breath that curled around me. I scrambled to my feet and bolted for the door, the shadows seeming to reach for me as I stumbled outside. I ran through the woods, branches clawing at my skin, my lungs burning as I pushed myself to escape the clutches of whatever darkness had stirred within that cabin. Bursting through the underbrush, I finally emerged into the clearing of my backyard, the comforting facade of home just ahead. I dashed inside, locking the door behind me, and leaned against it, gasping for breath as the adrenaline coursed through me. That night, I tried to shake off the fear, dismissing it as mere imagination, a ghost story come to life. But the feeling of being watched lingered, a throbbing pulse at the back of my mind. Days turned into weeks, and I convinced myself it was just a fleeting moment of panic, a figment of the summer's oppressive heat. Yet, I couldn't shake the sense of dread that hung over me. I avoided the woods, opting instead to stay indoors. Still, the pull of the cabin nagged at me, a siren call that whispered of secrets waiting to be unearthed. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting an eerie glow over the landscape, I gathered the courage to return. Armed with a flashlight and my heart pounding in my chest, I ventured back into those dark, intertwining paths. Each crunch of leaves underfoot seemed amplified in the heavy silence. As I approached the cabin, a wave of unease washed over me, but I pressed on. The door creaked open with startling ease, and I stepped inside, heart racing as the familiar chill enveloped me. The journal lay untouched on the floor, as if waiting for me. Feeling compelled, I opened it once more, the pages fluttering in response to my breath. As I read the man's writings, they seemed oddly familiar, echoing thoughts I had only entertained in the darkest corners of my mind. Each entry pushed me further toward understanding, revealing a descent that mirrored my own growing fears. I flipped through the pages until I reached the final entry, once more. This time, the words resonated deeply, carving a hollow ache in my chest. They are here. They are everywhere. You are not alone. Open your mind, and you will see. A shiver ran through me as the air shifted, heavy with unspoken promises. Shadows danced around the room, flickering just out of sight. Suddenly, an unseen force slammed the door shut behind me, and I spun around, panic flooding my senses. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a storm, filling my ears, drowning out reason. I realized that I was not simply witnessing someone struggle, I was becoming part of it. The shadows flared, enveloping me in darkness until only the glowing pages of the journal pierced through the void. I felt myself being drawn deeper into their world, everything I had known falling away, replaced by an urge to understand, to know the truth. In that suffocating darkness, an overwhelming presence washed over me, as though the fears of countless souls converged upon me, demanding to be acknowledged, demanding to be freed. I stumbled, gasping for breath, feeling insanity encroach upon me. The contrast of their torment echoed in my mind, flooding me with despair as voices intertwined, bearing their anguish. It was too much. I tore my eyes from the text and blinked rapidly, trying to escape the relentless pull of the shadows. Throwing the journal aside, I sprinted for the door, desperation clawing at my throat. My heart raced as I slammed into the door, my hands scrabbling for the knob until finally it gave way. I burst through, the light of the setting sun blinding me momentarily. I didn't stop running until I was safely home, collapsing onto my bed, the echoes of whispers and shadows lingering just outside my mind. That night, insomnia held me hostage as I listened to the distant rustling of the woods, the haunting realization that the darkness wasn't simply in those woods but had seeped into me. I felt it lurk at the edges of my consciousness, a gnawing fear of what I might find should I delve too deeply. Weeks turned into months. I avoided the woods, feeling its pull tugging at my skin, a whispered invitation. But the horrors I had tasted haunted me ceaselessly. My dreams became battlegrounds, nightmarish confrontations with the shadows I had seen, scenes of history long lost whispering in twisted forms. I began to see shapes in the dark, oddly familiar yet elusive, always just out of reach, taunting me. I could feel them watching, waiting for me to surrender to the allure of the unknown, a siren song echoing through my marrow. And finally, one fateful night, unable to endure the torment any longer, I found myself standing at the edge of the woods once more. The moon hung high, casting an otherworldly glow over the land, illuminating the path that led to the cabin. With each step, I felt the shadows swirl around me, and the coldness seeped into my bones, but I pressed forward, driven by a morbid curiosity that now felt irresistible. As I reached the cabin, the door creaked open, inviting me inside. The air was suffused with a tension that felt palpable, as if the shadows themselves were anticipating my arrival. It was time to uncover the truth, to face the darkness that had haunted me and the secrets hiding within that aged cabin. With each word I read from the journal, I had unknowingly woven myself deeper into its narrative, and now it beckoned me to cross the threshold. I stepped inside, ready to embrace whatever awaited me, knowing full well that I might never return from the depths of what lay ahead. As I started reading again, the walls began to close in around me, the shadows thickening until they suffocated the light, their whispers now chanting my name. The past had come alive, and I was hopelessly ensnared in its grasp, marked by the darkness that once belonged to the man before me. In that moment, I understood. I was no longer just a visitor. I had become part of the haunted legacy of the woods. The weight of the darkness settled onto my shoulders, and as the echoes of the cabin's twisted history embraced me, I felt an unsettling sense of belonging to something far greater, far more terrifying than I had ever imagined. And with that, the true horror began, a journey into the depths of madness where even the faintest glimmer of light could not penetrate, leaving me forever trapped in an endless cycle of darkness. It was a rainy night when I found myself driving down an empty country road, surrounded by the dense shadow of towering trees on either side. The monotonous grind of the tires against the slick pavement was the only sound breaking the silence, punctuated now and then by the distant rumble of thunder. My headlights pierced the darkness, revealing a ghostly landscape that seemed both familiar and alien, as if I was crossing into a realm where time itself had forgotten. I had just left a small gathering at a friend's house, and the laughter and warmth still lingered in my mind, a stark contrast to the encroaching night. My thoughts wandered aimlessly as I navigated the winding road, my attention flickering from the endless trees to the ominous clouds gathering above. The storm was brewing much faster than the weather report had indicated, and it felt as though the world around me was pressing in, making the air thick with an unshakable sense of foreboding. I had driven this road countless times before, but something felt different tonight. There was a weight to the surroundings, a sensation that sops into your bones and chills your skin. As I continued down the road, I noticed a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. Startled, I turned my head just in time to see a dark figure dart between the trees, vanishing into the shadows. I brushed it off as a trick of the light or perhaps a deer, though unease settled in my stomach. I accelerated slightly, urging my car forward like a protective shell against whatever might lurk in the wilderness. My heart raced, each beat resonating louder in my ears as I tried to shake off the creeping dread. Then, out of nowhere, my headlights caught a glimpse of something unnatural on the side of the road. My heart pounded in my chest as I braked hard, tires screeching against the asphalt. There, amidst a thicket of brush and undergrowth, lay an old, dilapidated house. I had never seen it before, and yet it filled me with a sense of grim nostalgia, as if it had waited years for me to stumble upon it. The windows, long devoid of any glass, stared back at me like hollow, soulless eyes. The paint hung off the walls in tattered strips, and vines and other creeping plants snaked up the sides, as if the earth itself wanted to reclaim it. Good instinct told me to drive away, but a morbid curiosity pulled me closer. As I stepped out of the car, the rain intensified, drenching me in seconds. I didn't bother to grab an umbrella. It felt like something in the air demanded I step into the storm. I approached the house, each step echoing with an unsettling quiet that felt alive, thrumming beneath my feet. I could see shards of glass gleaming amidst the rubble, sharp and sweet in their inviting danger, and I gingerly twisted the doorknob that hung precariously from its hinges. The door creaked open, a sound like a whisper on the wind, and I found myself enveloped in darkness. I took a tentative step inside, my heartbeat matching the hollow thump of the rain hitting the roof above. The air inside was stale and musty, thick with memories of abandonment. I flicked on the flashlight I always kept in my car, the beam cutting through the darkness and revealing cobwebs that stretched from corner to corner like the remnants of forgotten dreams. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath my weight, and I felt as if the house itself was groaning with age, warning me to leave. But a deep-seated urge drove me on, deeper into the belly of this cursed structure. I found my way into a small living room, the remnants of furniture strewn about like fallen soldiers of a long-lost battle. The dilapidated sofa faced a fireplace, its chimney now a gaping hole filled with the memories of a warmth that was long extinguished. Around me, the shadows seemed to twitch and move, and I could have sworn that I felt eyes upon me, watching, waiting. I pushed the thoughts aside and took another step forward, my light illuminating what appeared to be faint scratches on the wall. Curiosity thrust me closer, and my heart dropped as I traced the lines with my fingers. They were not just scratches, they were words, names, and dates etched into the wood, some nearly obliterated by time. My voice trembled as I whispered aloud, reading the names to myself: Michael, Sarah, Emma, James. Some were dated as far back as the early 1900s. I felt cold fingers of dread wrapping around my throat, squeezing tighter with each name I spoke. It was as if the house itself were warning me to turn back, to not awaken whatever lay within the shadows. But then, as if a puppet had cut its strings, a noise echoed from the back of the house, a soft, continuous thumping that reverberated through the stagnant air, coaxing me further into the unknown. I hesitated, a voice in my head screaming that this was a mistake, yet a darker force urged me forward. Against every ounce of common sense, I steadied my breath and followed the sound through a narrow, dark hallway, the beam of my flashlight shaking in my hand. The thumping grew louder with each step, rhythmical like a heartbeat, echoing in tandem with my own. I emerged into what looked like a bedroom, the walls peeling and marked with remnants of faded floral wallpaper, long gone from fashion. In the center stood a bed, draped in dust and shrouded by the memories of countless nights spent beneath the rickety roof. And there, upon the mattress, something stirred, a figure cocooned beneath the sheets. My mind fought against the urge to flee, but my body moved seemingly of its own accord, each step carrying me closer. Peering down, I caught sight of tangled hair cascading over the edge, framing a face so pale it almost blended in with the sheets. The thumping noise was no longer rhythmic but erratic, matching my rising anxiety. I called out, "Hello? Are you okay?" My voice barely rose above a whisper, almost swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. The figure stilled, but I saw no response. Approaching slowly, I reached out to touch the figure, my fingers grazing the fabric, and in an instant, the thumping ceased, replaced by an eerie silence that enveloped the room. In that silence, the figure shot upright, eyes wide and glassy. A look of sheer terror plastered on her face. She looked at me, or through me, and for a brief moment, I saw everything, the world shifting in her eyes, shadows dancing behind me, and terror clawing at the edges of her sanity. "You should not be here," she rasped, her voice warped and shaky. "It's not safe. They will come for you." Panic surging within me, I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering, casting grotesque shadows that twisted and writhed in the corners of the room. Suddenly, an unnatural chill swept through the space, freezing me in place. The air thickened, the darkness pooling around me, alive with a hunger that was palpable, almost sentient. I turned to run, but the doorway seemed to shift, elongating and narrowing as if the house itself were trying to trap me within its despairing walls. I screamed, clawing at the air, as disembodied voices echoed around me, chanting names in a twisted, guttural chorus. Heart racing, I forced myself forward, barreling through the threshold, crashing into the hall and not looking back. I sprinted through the darkness, the house groaning and roaring like a beast awakened from slumber. The floorboards creaked beneath me, the very bones of the structure shrieking in resistance. The heavy, oppressive air bore down as I raced, feeling the whispers clawing at my back, urging me to stay, to listen, to surrender. But every inch of me screamed to escape, to flee back to the world outside where the rain fell heavily, cleansing and oblivious. Finally, I burst through the front door, stumbling into the rain-soaked night, gasping for breath as I clattered down the steps to my car. I fumbled with the key, the rain mixing with my tears as I dropped it several times. I could feel the weight of the darkness pouring out behind me, an entity released into the storm. As the engine roared to life, I felt an icy wind rush past, the whispers now distinct and clear, a cacophony of voices crying, "Stay. Stay with us." I slammed the car into gear, peeling away from that house and the terror that lurked within. The drive home was a blur, the road ahead illuminated only by the flash of my headlights. I arrived in a daze, bursting through the door of my home and collapsing against the wall, my breathing ragged as the adrenaline surged through my veins. I was safe. That was all that mattered. Yet, as I lay in bed that night, the shadows of the room clung to me, suffocating in their reminder. Whispers composed of names floated through my mind, soft yet insistent, and as sleep slowly reclaimed me, I wondered whether I ever truly escaped that house or whether it had merely waited for me to leave, ready to consume another unsuspecting soul. In the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, nestled among towering pine trees and lined with picket fences, there was a house that everyone avoided. It wasn't just the peeling paint or the overgrown lawn that made it uninviting. It was the oppressive energy that seemed to seep from its very walls. No one could articulate it, but as children played outside, they would often glance at the house with wide eyes, whispering tales of the strange woman who lived inside. Mrs. Eldridge. I moved to Willow Creek just after my 30th birthday, seeking solace from the chaos of city life. I rented a small property a few blocks away, unaware of the undercurrents of fear that surrounded the abandoned house. My first few weeks passed uneventfully. I unfurled myself into the community, made new friends, and even adopted a golden retriever named Max. However, curiosity gnawed at me whenever I passed the Eldridge house. It was said that Mrs. Eldridge had been a recluse for decades, her husband having vanished without a trace years prior. Some claimed she had buried his secrets along with him, while others whispered that she was a witch, casting dark spells under the veil of night. Whatever the truth, people steered clear of her, save for the occasional brave soul who would dare to knock on her door, only to return rattled and pale. One humid summer evening, against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. Max seemed insistent, barking and pulling me toward the house as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows. As I approached, I noticed the cracked windows reflecting a sliver of light, like hollow eyes watching my every move. Curiosity triumphed over caution. I knocked on the door. It creaked open with a groan, revealing a dimly lit interior filled with tangled shadows. "Hello?" I called, stepping cautiously inside. The air was thick, tinged with the scent of mildew and something else, something sweet yet rotting. "Mrs. Eldridge?" No response. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. Strange knickknacks lined the walls, dusty porcelain dolls with cracked faces, jars filled with mysterious substances, and portraits of people with eyes that seemed to follow me as I moved. I made my way deeper inside, Max's presence a comforting anchor amidst the encroaching dread. As I ventured further, I stumbled upon a spiraling staircase coated in dust, its wooden steps creaking under my weight. I hesitated for a moment, but the promise of discovery urged me upward. The second floor was even darker, the air thickening with a sense of foreboding. As I reached the landing, I heard it, a faint whisper, like a breezy sigh echoing through the corridors, beckoning me to continue. Driven by a mix of fear and intrigue, I followed the sound to a door at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a dimly lit room filled with the same eerie atmosphere that had pervaded the house. Inside lay an old writing desk, cluttered with yellowed papers and ink bottles long dried up. The whispers grew louder as I approached, weaving in and out like tendrils of smoke. My heart raced as I peered over the desk and a chill washed over me. There, amidst the chaos of papers, was a journal. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the journal, its spine crackling under my fingers. The entries were frantic, narratives of fear and paranoia, detailing Mrs. Eldridge's descent into madness. She wrote about her husband's disappearance with growing dread, claiming he was taken by something darker than death itself, a shadow that clung to him relentlessly until he was no more. Her handwriting twisted into frenzied loops as she described dreams of a forest bathed in silver moonlight, where she could hear whispers of his name calling out to her. But then the entries took a more sinister turn. She began detailing rituals, dark incantations meant to summon him back. The last few pages were smeared, the ink bleeding into grotesque shapes that twisted my stomach. Words like sacrifice and eternal stood out, stark and jarring against the fray of her spiraling thoughts. Suddenly, the voices surrounding me escalated into a cacophony of cries and laughter, blurring into one frightening chorus. Panic bubbled within me. Just as I turned to flee, the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. I stumbled back, heart racing, as the room plunged into darkness. Max barked wildly outside, scratching at the door. I pounded on it, calling for help, but the voices grew louder, enveloping me in a chilling embrace. Shadows flickered around the edges of my vision, writhing like serpents. For what felt like an eternity, I was lost in that room, the shadows pulling at the edges of my sanity until I could barely tell where I ended and they began. In a last desperate attempt, I threw myself against the door and it burst open, sending me tumbling onto the floor of the hallway. Max rushed to me, his fur warm against my skin, grounding me back to reality that I didn't stop to think. We ran on instinct, barreling down the stairs, out of the house, into the night, the lingering whispers chasing us like a haunting melody. We burst outside, gasping for breath, the cool night air revitalizing my senses. The Eldridge house loomed behind me, silent once more, as if nothing had happened. Days turned into nights, and while I couldn't shake the memory of the house and its chilling secrets, life in Willow Creek continued. I often saw Mrs. Eldridge wandering in her garden, shrouded in shadows and whispers, a mournful expression on her face. It became clear to me that she was indeed a haunted soul tied to the darkness of her past, forever yearning for a love lost to the abyss. Months passed, and I often saw her through the corner of my eye, always at the edge of my consciousness. I would catch whispers of townsfolk discussing her, their tales heavier now with sympathy rather than fear. They claimed she grew fruit and flowers that thrived under the moonlight, magical in their beauty, but everyone still kept their distance. Then, one cold autumn afternoon, I received an unexpected knock at my door. It was Mrs. Eldridge, her eyes haunted but filled with an unusual sense of calm. "I knew you would come," she said softly, holding out a small, perfectly round apple. It glowed faintly in the waning sunlight. "It's from my garden," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I want you to have it." For a moment, I was struck by the urge to refuse, knowing the darkness that surrounded her, but something deeper compelled me. I took the apple, its surface smooth and inviting, yet I could feel a tremor of dread coursing through me. "Thank you," I managed to say, torn between gratitude and instinctual fear. As she turned to leave, a sudden urge to question her surged within me. "Mrs. Eldridge, what happened to your husband?" I blurted out, desperation lacing my voice. She paused, glancing back over her shoulder, her expression distant. "He was lost to the shadows, but I will always wait for his return." With that, she vanished down the path, leaving me with the bizarre offering cradled in my hands. That night, I laid in bed, staring at the apple illuminated by the moonlight streaming through my window, its vibrant red seeming to pulse with a life of its own. Sleep eluded me as I turned it over and over, wondering if perhaps it held the key to what had transpired in that house. Drawn by morbid curiosity, I took a bite. The moment the flesh burst against my teeth, the world around me transformed. Images rushed through my mind like a torrential stream. I saw flashes of the Eldridge house, the ritual dances in the moonlit forest, the dark shadow enveloping a man, Mrs. Eldridge's husband, writhing in an ethereal grip, crying out for help. The anguish of loss surged through me, a heart-wrenching echo that settled deep within my soul. When I finally opened my eyes, I was in the garden of the Eldridge house, surrounded by night-blooming flowers that twinkled against the silvery moonlight. I looked down at my hands, bewildered, realizing I was standing within the very heart of her sorrow. Shadows flickered in the corners of my vision, dancing in delight, and I understood, horrifyingly, that I was drawn into her lingering grasp. No longer an observer, I felt her pain, her longing, and in that moment became entwined with her fate. As the whispers wound around me, the shadows beckoned me closer, promising the reunion she so desperately desired, blurring the lines between love and confinement. In that eternal moment, I realized I was not just a visitor. I had become part of the dark legacy of the Eldridge house, a soul forever lost to its haunting embrace, bound to wait in the shadows. I've always believed that the darkest corners of the mind can often conjure the most terrifying tales, but nothing could have prepared me for the true horror I would confront one night in the secluded woods behind my childhood home. Growing up in a small town nestled between the mountains, I was surrounded by dense forests that harbored countless secrets. As a curious child, I spent my days exploring these woods, crafting adventures in my imagination and pretending to be the hero of fantastical stories. But as I grew older, those same woods took on a different character, becoming a place that whispered of dangers and unease. It happened on a chilly autumn evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness crept in. I was sitting alone in my room, flipping through old photo albums filled with smiling faces and cherished memories, but something felt amiss. The shadows outside my window deepened, and an unsettling feeling nudged at my mind, urging me to remember the warnings I had always dismissed, the tales my grandmother spun about the woods filled with spirits and malevolent beings lurking in the shadows, watching and waiting. Eventually, curiosity overwhelmed fear, and I made a decision that would change everything. I grabbed a flashlight and a thin jacket, stepped outside, and ventured into the familiar but now foreboding woods. The air was crisp, and leaves crunched beneath my feet as I made my way along the narrow paths I knew so well. With every step, I felt the weight of silence settle around me, hushing the usual sounds of wildlife. The deeper I ventured, the more the atmosphere shifted. It felt as if the very forest were holding its breath, as if aware of my presence and questioning my motives for being there. Minutes turned into what felt like hours as I walked deeper, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness that seemed to multiply around me, twisting branches appearing like skeletal hands reaching out from the shadows, urging me to turn back. But the thrill of adventure pushed me onward. It had always been alluring to me, and I couldn't shake off the sensation that tonight was different, that perhaps I would find something extraordinary hidden away in the woods. I stumbled upon an overgrown path I didn't recognize, its entrance barely visible behind a curtain of thick branches. Hesitant but intrigued, I cleared the way and stepped onto the unknown trail, feeling a mix of trepidation and excitement wash over me. The further I walked, the more the air shifted, wrapping around me like a cold, damp shroud. A sense of foreboding wrapped tightly around my chest. It became evident that these woods were not just trees and animals. They were alive with something else, something primal that seemed to disrupt the very fabric of reality. Suddenly, a rustling sound broke the stillness, emanating from the darkness ahead. My heart raced as I shone my flashlight toward the source, revealing an old, weathered sign that read, "Caution, unstable ground." My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but I felt an inexplicable pull to investigate further, to uncover whatever had lain in wait for me across the unstable terrain. Ignoring the warning, I pressed on, each step feeling heavier as uncertainty clouded my thoughts. The sound of rustling intensified, now accompanied by low, guttural whispers that slithered through the trees, feeding on my fear, taunting my bravado. Goosebumps rippled down my arms, my breath quickening as panic bubbled beneath the surface. It was then I saw it, a flicker of movement in the underbrush, darting just beyond the edge of my light. I called out, half expecting someone to answer, but only the darkness responded. The whispers grew louder, a haunting chorus enveloping me as I took a step back, realizing I was far from the safety of home. The shadows seemed to move with intent, encircling me, and I knew I wasn't alone. It felt like I was watching from every angle, sentient, hungry, and malevolent. I turned to run, but my legs felt heavy, like they were sinking into the ground itself. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but the forest conspired against me, branches writhing like serpents, snagging my clothing and forming a barrier I could hardly navigate. I stumbled, my flashlight flickering as if even it sensed the impending doom closing in. The whispers transformed into laughter, a chilling sound that reverberated through my bones, echoing the darkness that suffocated the woods. I finally broke free from the grasping branches, breaking into a sprint that sent me crashing through the underbrush. The cold wind bit at my face, harsh breaths escaping my lips, my heart pounding like a drum in the night. As I ran, I could hear the laughter morphing into a cacophony of voices that called my name, echoing with a sinister familiarity. It felt maddeningly close, as though some unseen force was toying with me, reveling in my terror. I burst onto familiar ground, the trees thinning, the comforting glow of my house visible in the distance, but the laughter followed me, reverberating in the air like a haunting melody that wouldn't release its grip. I stumbled through the door, slamming it shut behind me, my heart racing as I leaned against the cold wood, gasping for breath, praying I was safe. But the fear clung to me like a second skin, and through the thin walls, I could still hear the soft rustling of leaves and whispers that seemed to seep into the edges of my sanity. In the days that followed, I tried to shake off the horrifying encounter, convincing myself it was merely a trick of the mind, a fabrication born from untamed imagination. I didn't dare return to the woods. Yet, shadows danced in my peripheral vision, laughter echoed in the silence of the night, pulling my thoughts back to that night. I noticed changes within myself, too, a creeping dread that seeped into my dreams, an insatiable feeling that the forest still beckoned, its secrets not yet unveiled. People in town noticed my shift in behavior, my once carefree spirit overshadowed by an invisible weight. I kept my experience hidden, fearing judgment or disbelief. Nights turned into weeks, and the unease never left. It gnawed at the edges of my reality, making every creak and groan of my house feel like a sinister whisper. On the night of the harvest festival, enticed by the laughter and warmth of celebration, my friends convinced me to join them despite my reservations. As I stood surrounded by the vibrant energy of the festivities, the laughter of children, and the crackling of the bonfire, I felt a momentary reprieve from the dread that clung to me. But the shadows never truly faded. They lingered just at the edge of my vision. As the night wore on and the festivities faded, I found myself wandering away from the crowd, drawn back toward the woods, as though the whispers had been calling me all along. Against my better judgment, I ventured closer, feel a magnetic pull guiding me down a path I thought I would never tread again. With every step, the atmosphere grew heavier, the echoes of laughter from the festival dulled as I plunged deeper into the darkness. The trees loomed over me, their branches clawing at the sky, concealing secrets I could sense but could not decipher. It wasn't until I reached the spot where I had fled that I felt a bone-chilling realization wash over me. I wasn't just being called, I was being hunted. The air turned cold, and the whispers returned, more insistent and louder than before, twisting around my mind, mixing with memories of my childhood adventures, warping them into something wicked. The shadows shifted in ways that seemed sentient, swirling with a purpose that sent shivers down my spine. It felt like a game, an ancient game I had unwittingly stepped into when I first ventured into the woods that night. An overwhelming panic surged through me as I turned to escape, but the path twisted and morphed, leading me deeper into the heart of darkness. Terror clawed at my throat as I stumbled forward, desperately seeking the safety of light. The woods closed in, engulfing me in a silence so profound it hurt, broken only by the sound of my racing heart and the hushed whispers that grew louder, shrieking my name in a macabre serenade. It became clear that the woods were alive, and I was merely a plaything, caught in a web spun by forces I couldn't understand. In one last act of desperation, I shouted into the darkness, "Leave me alone." A chill enveloped me, suffocating all hope. and for a heartbeat, silence descended, heavy and oppressive. Then, in response, laughter erupted, echoing through the trees, a cacophony that shook the very ground beneath my feet. I ran blindly, the laughter chasing me, taunting my efforts to escape. My lungs burned, the air thick and cloying, the shadows closing in until they became a tangible force, pulling me down. I fell, crashing to the ground, and in that moment of despair, as I lay there, breathless and terrified, I felt the cold embrace of the darkness wrap around me with an intimate familiarity. It was a moment that stretched into eternity, a realization that I was never meant to leave, that the whispers and laughter were more than just echoes. They were beckoning me, inviting me to join them in an eternal dance of shadows. As I succumbed to the despair, a flicker of light pierced the encroaching darkness, a fleeting reminder of warmth, offering a glimmer of hope in the abyss. But no amount of light could penetrate the depths of the woods or the depths of my own heart. I knew then that I had become part of the story, an unwilling participant in their game. The woods and I were eternally bound. In the hushed whispers of the trees and the laughter echoing in the night, a new tale was born, one of surrender capturing the essence of my soul, entwined with the darkness, and I would forever remain a ghost haunting the memories of those who dared to tread too close. The old house at the end of our street had always been the subject of whispered rumors and fearful glances. It stood on a hill, looming in the distance like a forgotten monument to something sinister, its once vibrant paint peeling away to reveal the gray wood beneath, which seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. My friends and I grew up with tales of its haunted past, stories of a family that mysteriously vanished, leaving only their echoes behind, trapped within the peeling walls and overgrown garden. We laughed them off as bedtime stories crafted to scare us, but deep down, the idea that something terrible had happened there lingered like a shadow over our youthful bravado. As the years passed, we grew more curious, our childish curiosity morphing into a dare. It was late autumn when we finally decided to explore the house, emboldened by a mix of bravado and foolhardiness. The air was crisp, the sky a slate gray, adding a sense of foreboding that matched our feelings as we approached the front door, which hung precariously on its hinges. My heart raced, pounding like a drum in my chest as I pushed the door open, its creaks slicing through the stillness like a knife. Dust danced in the beams of fading light that filtered through the broken windows, giving an ethereal quality to the musty air. As we stepped inside, the house seemed to swallow the sounds of our footsteps, wrapping us in a suffocating silence. We moved cautiously through the rooms, each one holding remnants of a life once lived, tattered furniture, faded photographs, and walls that seemed to breathe with memories. In the living room, a grand piano stood silent and decaying, its keys yellowed and broken, yet somehow I felt as if it was waiting for someone to play it again. I reached out to touch it, drawn by an inexplicable force, but a cold wave of dread washed over me, and I quickly withdrew my hand as if it had been burned. The atmosphere shifted, and I could feel the air thickening, a tension that prickled at the back of my neck. Echoes of laughter, once so lively, seemed to reverberate in the corners of my mind, and I shuddered at the thought of the family that once inhabited these spaces. We moved deeper into the house, passing through a narrow hallway lined with doorways that led to forgotten rooms. It was then that we heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound that seemed to emanate from upstairs. My friends looked at each other, fear etched on their faces, but curiosity held us captive. We crept up the staircase, each step creaking beneath our weight, as if warning us to turn back. The upper floor was bathed in shadows, the faint light barely penetrating the gloom. As we reached the top, the sound grew louder, a low, mournful wail that sent chills down my spine. It echoed through the corridor, reverberating off the walls, calling to us. The source seemed to be coming from a room at the end of the hall. I exchanged a glance with my friends, trying to gauge their courage. We were all terrified, yet the pull of the unknown urged us forward. We approached the door, which stood slightly ajar, and I hesitated. I could feel something powerful and ancient behind that door, as if the very essence of the house resided within. Finally, with a shared nod, we pushed it open together. Inside, the room was dimly lit, the remnants of a child's bedroom scattered about, broken toys, a faded quilt, and walls covered with fading drawings. In the corner, a small figure stood, its back to us. My heart raced, panic gripping me as I opened my mouth to call out, but the words caught in my throat. The figure turned slowly, revealing a face that was both familiar and foreign, a child, but not quite right. Its eyes, dark and hollow, bore into mine, and I felt an overwhelming sense of despair wash over me. "Help me," it whispered, a sound so soft yet laden with desperation that it pierced my soul. I wanted to turn and flee, to escape the terror that held me paralyzed, but something in its gaze held me captive. It raised a hand, pointing toward the far corner of the room, and I felt an inexplicable urge to move closer, drawn toward whatever it was hiding. As I stepped forward, my friends stood frozen behind me, their expressions reflecting the same mix of terror and fascination. The air grew colder, a biting chill that penetrated deep into my bones, as the figure's form flickered like a candle flame, growing dimmer with each passing moment. I reached the corner where it pointed, and there, hidden beneath the floorboards, I saw a tattered box. My breath quickened as I pulled it free, my fingers trembling with a mix of dread and curiosity. The box creaked open, revealing a jumble of old letters, photographs, and yellowed newspaper clippings, all detailing the tragic fate of the family who once lived here, a family that had vanished without a trace. I glanced back at the figure, which now seemed to fade into the shadows, its pleading eyes no longer fixed on me. Suddenly, the room was engulfed in a cacophony of whispers, the air thick with sorrowful cries that reverberated through the walls like a haunting melody. My heart raced as I realized the truth. The child was not lost but trapped, a soul bound to the house, forever seeking help. A wave of heat flooded my body, and I knew we needed to leave. I slammed the box shut, the cacophony of whispers crescendoing around us, and turned to run, calling out to my friends to follow. We dashed down the hall, the whispers morphing into screams that chased us like shadows, urging us to stay, to listen, to understand. I plunged down the staircase, the world a blur as we barreled toward the door, bursting through and tumbling into the open air. Once outside, I collapsed onto the grass, gasping for breath, the cacophony fading as the distance grew between us and the house. My friends joined me, their faces ashen, staring back at the dark structure that loomed over us, now silent but still foreboding. We vowed never to return, to leave the house, the whispers, and the lost child behind us. But as the weeks turned into months, the images of that night haunted my dreams. Nightmares filled with shadowy figures and desperate pleas that left me shaken. I carried the weight of unfulfilled promises and unanswered questions, for in seeking the truth, we had stumbled upon a sorrow that was never ours to bear. To this day, the house remains standing, a silent sentinel of its past, and although I've tried to forget, the memory lingers like a stubborn ache, a reminder that some doors, once opened, should never be closed again. It was a cold October night when I found myself driving down a deserted road nestled between tall, shadowy pines. The windshield wipers struggled against the relentless downpour as the headlights flickered, barely illuminating the winding path ahead. My mind was heavy with thoughts of my childhood home, where the last flickering memories refused to fade completely. I hadn't visited in years, but the recent death of my estranged mother forced me back to the place I had tried so hard to escape. It was with a mixture of dread and nostalgia that I pulled into the long, gravel driveway, which was now overgrown with weeds and weeds. The old house loomed like a ghost, its paint peeling, windows dark, and surrounded by an unsettling silence that felt almost alive. The memories flooded back as I stepped out of the car, the echo of laughter that once filled the air, the summer nights spent running through the fields, the warmth of family gatherings that slowly morphed into bitterness and resentment. I hesitated at the door, heart racing as I fumbled with the keys. As the door creaked open, it felt like unearthing a time capsule filled with both familiar warmth and a chill of dread. Inside, the air was stale, as if it had been waiting for me, thick with the scent of mildew and something more intangible, something heavy. As I stepped inside, the floorboards groaned beneath my weight, like voices from the past whispering reminders of what once was. Photographs lined the dusty walls, faded faces watching me with hollow eyes. My childhood self stared back, an innocent smile plastered across my face, completely unaware of the darkness that would come to taint those bright days. I made my way to the living room, where the furniture sat as if frozen in time, untouched by the outside world. I could see my mother's old rocking chair, its once vibrant red fabric now dulled and ripped at the seams, memories flickering in my mind of late-night conversations and soft lullabies that turned into arguments. I could hear her voice echoing in my ears, full of love but tinged with bitterness as she spoke of my father, a man long gone, but whose shadow loomed large over our lives. With each step further into the house, memories morphed, twisting into darker recollections, the arguments that escalated, the glass that shattered, and the days I would hide in my room, listening to the chaos erupting just beyond my door. I had thought I escaped this life, yet here I was, drawn back as if by an invisible thread, compelled to relive those moments I had buried deep. As hours passed, I rummaged through the remnants of my past. Old toys, forgotten clothes, and dusty childhood trinkets scattered haphazardly. With every item I uncovered, a strange sense of nostalgia battled with unease. I stumbled upon a box labeled Memories, filled with letters and mementos, each a reminder of who I was and who I had become. Skimming through the letters, I found one addressed to me from my mother, a letter she had written during the thick of our estrangement. My hands trembled as I unfolded the brittle paper, my heart racing at her carefully scripted words that danced between regret and love, a testament to the tumultuous bond we shared. As I read her words, a cold breeze swept through the room, making the hairs on my neck stand on end. It felt as if the very house held its breath, waiting for something. Chills ran down my spine. The unease I had brushed aside crept back, stronger this time. But I brushed it off, convincing myself it was just the confines of my memories and the shadows playing tricks on my mind. I decided to head upstairs to my old room. The narrow staircase creaked with every step, echoing through the stagnant air. It felt claustrophobic, as if the walls themselves were inching closer, tightening around me. When I reached the top, I paused outside my childhood bedroom, heart pounding as I grasped the doorknob. It swung open with a reluctance that sent chills down my spine. The room was just as I left it, or at least, it had been until time turned it into a graveyard of my past. Posters peeled from the walls, dust lay thick over every surface, and my old bed sat untouched, yet it felt as if the room was alive, holding on to every secret I had tried to forget. It was then that I noticed a shadow dart across the corner of the room. I blinked and froze, my heart racing as I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. I stood there, breath caught in my throat, when I felt an inexplicable pressure mounting, as if the very air around me thickened. I moved to the window, hoping to shake off the feeling that crept over me, but when I glanced outside, the storm had intensified, and darkness loomed heavier than before. Thunder rumbled ominously in the distance, echoing my growing unease. That's when a sound pierced through the din. A faint melody floated through the air, a familiar lullaby. I swung around, confusion and dread mingling in my chest. It was a song my mother used to sing, a haunting tune that struck a chord deep within me. "Mom," I called out hesitantly, but the house answered in silence. The melody continued, soft and eerie, wrapping around me like a shroud. As I followed the sound, I stumbled onto the hallway, which felt almost alive, shifting and warping as I took each step. My pulse quickened, each note pulling me deeper into the house's sinister embrace. The lullaby led me toward the attic door, a place I had long avoided. Something was drawing me in, something that felt both comforting and terrifying. Heart racing, I grabbed the doorknob and pulled, the hinges creaking in protest. As I stepped into the dusty attic, the air felt electric, charged with a presence that made my skin prickle. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb, casting long shadows that danced menacingly. Boxes piled high surrounded me, and at the center stood a large mirror, its surface tarnished and cracked. The melody grew louder, echoing off the walls, drawing me toward the mirror. As my reflection stared back, I noticed that it wasn't just my face I saw. It was my mother's, her expression a grotesque mixture of sorrow and longing. My breath caught in my throat as her lips curled into a smile, yet her eyes remained hollow, something darker lurking just beneath the surface. I stumbled back, heart racing, and in that moment, the air shifted. A cold wind swept through the attic, extinguishing the flickering bulb and plunging the room into darkness. Panic surged through me, and I turned to flee, but an unseen force held me in place, paralyzing my body. "Leave," a voice hissed, echoing around me, chilling me to the bone. "You don't belong here." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the weight of my past crashing down upon me. As I struggled against the invisible grip, memories flooded back, intertwined with the haunting melody that danced through the air. It was my mother's voice, a plea, a warning, and a cry that transcended time. "You need to break free." With one final surge of strength, I lunged for the door, ripping it open and stumbling back into the hallway, gasping for breath. I fled down the stairs, the air thickening around me as shadows reached out, clawing at my heels. The house groaned in protest, as if it were alive and trying to drag me back into its hellish embrace. I sprinted outside into the storm, rain pelting against me as I gasped for breath. My heart raced in my chest as I jumped into the car, fumbling with the keys until I managed to start it. The engine roared to life, and I tore down the gravel driveway, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The shadows faded in the rearview mirror, but the memories haunted me, the echoes of the past still lingering in my mind. As I navigated the winding road, I swore I could still hear that lullaby faintly in the wind, a phantom song trailing behind me like a specter, reminding me that some ties cannot easily be severed. Even as I drove away, my heart heavy with unresolved emotions, I knew I could never truly escape. The burden of the past bled into the present, lessons learned too late, woven into my very being, lingering like the scars left behind by an unyielding storm. I had hoped to find closure, but instead, I was reminded that some horrors never truly fade. They become part of you, haunting your steps, whispering lullabies in the dark, forever a part of the tapestry of your existence.